When the congressional hearing finally adjourned, reporters swarmed the marble steps like a tide. Riley didn't pause. She had one hand wrapped around a flash drive lanyard and the other on Valor's collar. Cameras flashed. Mics shoved forward. Questions fired. "Agent, is it true a dog's recollection is your star witness?" Riley answered with silence, but Valor spoke in the only language he needed. He stepped between her and the shouting crowd, shoulders squared, gaze steady. Weeks earlier, technicians had projected the dog's neural data across a screen, grainy images of a masked man, a basement, a girl. Experts scoffed. Dogs don't remember, they react. That changed the moment. Valor recognized the courtroom scent of a single broken music box and let out a howl that rattled chandeliers. Now the world wanted the story, and the story wanted protecting. As Riley descended the steps, she whispered to the shepherd, "Show me brave." Valor's tail flicked once, and she knew memories can be caged, but loyalty will always find the lock's weak point. The sun was just beginning to sag behind the rooftops of Greystone when Riley Mercer stepped out of her cruiser. The air was dry and still, the kind that settled in the lungs like dust. Across the street stood the house peeling paint, boarded windows, yard-long surrendered to weeds, abandoned, according to city records. But something about it felt watched. "Ready, Valor?" she whispered. The German shepherd beside her gave a soft grunt, his amber eyes scanning the porch. His vest bore the word "Polis," but it was his silence that did most of the speaking. He was older now, graying around the muzzle, ears a little slower to rise, but there was something in the way he moved that still carried warning. Inside, the team fanned out with routine precision. A suspected trafficking route had led to this address. A gut feeling turned into a tip, and now a warrant. Riley led the sweep. She'd been with K9 for 6 years now, long enough to know when the air changes before the danger does. The house reeked of mildew and rot. Wallpaper hung in curls like dead skin. A child's tricycle sat at the base of the stairs, rusted and wrong. "Clear," one officer called from the upstairs, another from the back rooms, but Valor didn't stop. He was at the basement door, nose pressed against it, body coiled tight. A low growl rumbled in his throat, deep and guttural, not of threat, but of warning. Riley followed his gaze. "Let's clear the basement," she said. She descended first, flashlight in hand, the beam slicing through cobwebs and concrete. The air grew colder, the farther down they went. Water dripped somewhere in the dark. The foundation moaned, as if remembering something. At the base of the stairs, Valor halted. His head turned sharply to the right to a portion of the wall that didn't quite match the rest. Newer bricks, uneven mortar. His breathing changed shallower, quicker. Then he began to scratch, not wildly, but with purpose. As if he knew. "Riley," Officer Torres called from behind her. "There's nothing down here," Riley cut in. "Listen." At first, nothing. Then tap, 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 then silence. Then again, tap. Not a rat, not pipes. Rhythmic, measured, a knock. Riley's breath hitched. She crouched beside Valor, who was now sitting, ears forward, tail still, focused. "I need backup at the southeast basement wall," she said into her radio, voice steady despite the goose flesh rising along her arms. "We've got something, or someone." The sound was unmistakable now. Tap, 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 pause. It came from behind the patchwork of newer bricks, a corner of the basement that looked like it didn't belong, as if someone had tried to erase something. But nothing truly disappears. Not when pain clings to the air like mold on stone. Riley stood frozen, heart thudding in her chest. She exchanged a glance with Torres, who had gone pale. "Is that knocking?" he whispered, already knowing the answer. Valor growled again, low and deep. The kind of growl that vibrated in your ribs before you heard it in your ears. He sat, then pressed his nose gently to the wall, waiting. Not alert like a dog, expecting danger, but reverent. As if the thing behind that wall wasn't a threat, but a memory. Riley raised her voice, calm but firm. "This is the police. If someone can hear me knock again, once for yes." A pause. Tap. The air changed. Even the dust seemed to still. Torres swore under his breath. Another officer deacon was already shouldering his pack off, pulling out tools. "We're not waiting," Riley said. "Get through it, now." They worked quickly. Chisels, crowbars, bare hands when the tools slipped. Bricks fell one by one in muted thuds. Concrete dust filled the air, sharp in the throat, but nobody stopped. Something ancient stirred in that silence urgency, maybe, or guilt. Then came the smell. Faint, sour, like damp clothes left to rot in a sealed room. Riley pulled her collar to her face. Valor didn't flinch. He moved closer, eyes trained on the dark opening forming through the breach. Another brick gave way, then another, and suddenly there was a hole big enough to shine a flashlight through. Jesus, Deacon muttered. Behind the wall was a crawl space, no more than 5 feet wide and maybe 8 deep. Inside, curled against the back corner like a forgotten shadow, was a child, a girl. Her skin was pale beneath layers of dirt, her hair clumped and matted, her arms wrapped around her legs, knees drawn to her chest like she'd long since learned to become as small as possible. But it was her eyes that stopped them cold, wide, alert, and staring straight at Valor. She didn't scream, didn't speak, just locked onto the dog like he was the only thing keeping her tethered to this world. Riley dropped to her knees. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, voice breaking through her own tension. "My name is Riley. You're safe now." No response. The girl's lips trembled, but she didn't speak. "She's breathing," Torres whispered behind her. "Barely. We need medical now." Riley reached forward slowly, her hands open, non-threatening. "Can I help you out of there?" But the girl didn't move. Valor stepped forward. Riley froze. "Wait, let me—" But the German Shepherd didn't wait. He moved quietly, deliberately, until his massive head nudged just inside the crawl space. He lowered himself onto his belly, inching closer. And then he stopped. The girl blinked. She didn't recoil. Her eyes shimmered, one tear tracing down the grime on her cheek. Then, with a trembling whisper, she said the first words anyone had heard from her. "He used to protect me from him." Riley's breath caught in her throat. He wouldn't let him come close. Not when he growled like that. Torres looked to Riley, stunned. "She knows him?" Valor didn't move. He remained still, front paws folded under, ears tilted back not in aggression, but in submission. The girl reached a frail hand forward. Her fingers, raw and thin, brushed against his fur. The moment cracked something open in the room. Not just silence, but memory. Riley whispered, "What's your name?" The girl took a long, shaking breath. Eliza." "Okay, Eliza," Riley said softly. "We're going to get you out of here." She didn't resist when Riley crawled halfway in, arms cradling her thin frame like porcelain. She weighed next to nothing. Her skin was cold, bones sharp against Riley's jacket. As Riley lifted her out, Eliza kept one hand touching Valor's fur, refusing to break contact. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They set up oxygen, IV fluids, but it was clear Eliza was near the edge, dehydrated, malnourished, possibly injured. She didn't cry, didn't flinch, just held Valor's gaze even as the medics moved her onto a stretcher. One medic whispered to another, "It's a miracle she's even alive." But Riley's mind was already spinning. The way Eliza looked at Valor, it wasn't curiosity. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Something had bound them long before this night. Something deeper than chance. As the stretcher rolled past, Valor followed unprompted, walking silently at Eliza's side. She turned her head toward him, lips barely moving. "You came back?" Riley stood there, frozen in place, heart hammering in her chest. Not from the adrenaline of the rescue, but from a deeper, colder thought rising inside her. How did she know this dog? The emergency lights cast an uneasy glow across the basement stairs as the stretcher bumped its way upward. Eliza's frail frame barely making a dent in the blanket draped over her. But her eyes, those hollow, watchful eyes, never once left Valor, not even as they reached daylight. The moment the paramedics wheeled her into the back of the ambulance, Valor jumped into the seat beside the stretcher without command. No hesitation, no glance back, just purpose. One medic moved to stop him. "Hey, he can't—" "Let him," Riley said quietly. Her voice didn't invite debate. They allowed it. Somehow, everyone in that space understood. Eliza wasn't going anywhere without the dog, and Valor wasn't going anywhere without her. The ride to the hospital passed in silence. except for the rhythm of machines and Eliza's uneven breaths. But when the doors swung open at County General and the fluorescent lights hit them, Eliza stirred. Her hand, which had remained limp until now, reached out with instinctive precision toward Valor's chest. "He used to protect me," she whispered again, barely audible over the EMT's chatter. "From him." The hallway seemed to still. One nurse froze mid-step. Riley's fingers tightened around her notepad. "What did she just say?" Torres asked, turning toward Riley. "Did she mean Valor?" Riley nodded slowly. "She wasn't speaking metaphorically." In the observation room, doctors examined Eliza's vitals while she lay motionless, hooked to wires, her lips pale and dry. Her eyes darted from nurse to doctor, but always returned to the German shepherd lying near the corner, tail tucked, unmoving but watchful. A detective named Callum entered, older, stooped, the lines in his face like carved warnings. "Heard we found her in a wall," he said grimly. "Sick world." Riley didn't respond. Callum gestured toward Eliza. "She say anything?" "She said the dog protected her," Riley said slowly. "From someone. A him." Callum frowned. "From the suspect? The man who kept her locked up?" "Number. It wasn't past tense like that." Riley shook her head. "It was like she knew Valor, like they've met before." Callum raised an eyebrow. "That's not possible. You've only had the dog 8 months. Got him from a retired handler in Chicago." Riley's voice dropped. "What if that's not where he came from?" Valor lifted his head at the sound of her voice, ears perked slightly. Callum gave her a long look. "You think this is more than a kidnapping?" Riley didn't answer directly. She walked over to the room's observation glass, staring through at the girl and the dog. The way Eliza's fingers curled slightly each time Valor exhaled. The way she blinked slower when he was near. Not comfort. Something more primal, like she was trying to remember how to be human again, and he was the only reference she had. Suddenly, Eliza sat up, gasping. Doctors rushed to her side. She flinched, yanking back against the mattress, eyes wild. "Don't touch me," she cried. "Not without him." Everyone froze. Valor stood. The moment he padded to the edge of her bed, Eliza quieted. Her breathing slowed. A nurse, visibly shaken, stepped back. "She trusts him," one whispered. "More than any of us." Riley turned to Callum. "I need his intake records. All of them. Medical scans, adoption files, anything we have." Callum crossed his arms. "You think we've got the wrong timeline?" "I think we've got the wrong dog," Riley replied, "or at least the wrong idea of who he used to be." They stood in silence for a beat. Then Eliza spoke again, this time barely more than a breath. "He growled when the man came. He never let him touch me at night." One of the nurses turned away, visibly shaken. Riley swallowed hard. "She's talking about protection patterns." "Patterns?" Callum asked. Riley nodded. Canine Second in high-risk deployments are trained to anticipate abuse. Some develop instinctive shields. But this isn't just training. This is memory. Callum's eyes narrowed. "Memory? You're saying the dog remembers her?" "She remembers him," Riley said. "But yes, I think it's mutual." Valor let out a quiet huff, resting his head gently against the girl's hand. She didn't flinch. Riley leaned in, her voice gentle. "Eliza, sweetheart, do you remember where you saw him before?" Eliza turned her face toward Riley. For the first time, she really looked at her. There was something beyond exhaustion in that gaze, something cracked and ancient. "He had a tag, not with his name, just numbers. 7, a lot of 7s. Her eyes fluttered. "He was always bleeding, but he never left me." Callum looked up, frowning. 7? That mean anything?" Riley's face changed. 7. It tugged at something in the back of her mind, something buried under years of case files and rumors. A project. A ghost. "Callum," she said slowly, "do you believe in programs the government denied ever existed?" He gave her a long look. "You mean urban legends?" "No," she replied. "I mean the kind of program where they train dogs not just to obey but to remember." The fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway flickered overhead, humming faintly like an unspoken warning. Riley sat alone in the waiting area, Valor at her feet. head resting on his paws. The dog had barely moved since Eliza was taken into intensive care, his ears twitching only when her name passed through the air, like a prayer. It had been hours. She looked at him not just as her partner, but as something far more layered now. There was a quietness in his presence that hadn't been there before, a sense that he was watching more than just the room. He was remembering. Riley's fingers found the edge of his collar, rough with wear. She'd adjusted it herself when she first took him home from the precinct kennel. Back then, she had thought it was just a collar, just leather, just metal, just standard issue. But something wasn't sitting right. Eliza's words from earlier kept circling back in her mind. He had a tag, not with his name, just numbers. 7. A lot of sevens. She slid the collar from around Valor's neck. He didn't resist, only blinked slowly, like he understood. The stitching at the inner seam was uneven, slightly raised, as if something had once been sewn inside and later sealed again. She turned it over in her hands, fingers brushing the inner lining, and then something shifted beneath the leather. A bump. Her pulse quickened. Riley reached into her back pocket and retrieved her folding knife. With careful pressure, she sliced along the inner seam, peeling the material back just enough to reveal what had been hidden for years. A metallic tag, no larger than a postage stamp, embedded into the leather. It was nearly flush with the surface, aged and tarnished, but still legible. She angled it toward the light. Her breath caught. Property of Project Halcyon. Tier 7. Serial. No. L73. Velter 77. Clearance required. She stared at it in disbelief. Halcyon. The word echoed in her chest, like a name whispered in the dark. Jesus Christ, she muttered. Valor let out a low whine, shifting his weight. Riley sank back in her seat, her mind racing. She'd heard of Halcyon. Everyone in special operations had. It had always been the subject of whispers, rumors, passed in bars by retired handlers, half drunk and full of things they weren't supposed to know. A government program that had gone dark. Dogs trained not just for attack or detection, but for behavioral imprinting. The myth said they were more than tools. They were memory vessels, observers, witnesses. And now, the proof was sitting at her feet. Her hands were trembling. She pulled out her phone, snapped a photo of the tag, and immediately encrypted it through a secure messaging app. Then she sent it to one person she hadn't spoken to in years, Martin Reyes. Her former instructor, her former informant, her brother's last contact. Her thumb hovered over the message before hitting send. Do you remember Halcyon? I found a Tier 7, alive, and he knows the girl. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to slow her breathing. It didn't work. Valor nudged her leg with his nose. Riley looked down at him. There was something ancient in his expression, something she couldn't explain. A wisdom that wasn't supposed to be there. A sorrow that didn't belong to him, but that he carried anyway, like he had seen too much. Where did they take you, she whispered, and what did they make you do? Before she could fall deeper into thought, her phone buzzed. A reply. From Reyes. Where are you? Don't speak to anyone else. They'll come for the dog. Riley's blood turned cold. She rose quickly and fastened the collar back around Valor's neck, carefully sealing the seam again with a strip of medical tape. If anyone else found that tag, if they knew what he was, he wouldn't just be taken. He'd be erased. Just like the others. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. A young nurse emerged from the ICU wing. She's asking for you, the nurse said softly. And the dog. Riley nodded, still gripping her phone. Inside the hospital room, Eliza was propped up by pillows, her skin pale, but her eyes sharper, now focused. Riley stepped in quietly, Valor following behind, like a shadow. The moment Eliza saw him, her entire frame softened. He came back, she said hoarsely. Riley walked to the side of her bed. You remembered him. Eliza nodded. He remembered me first. Riley knelt beside her. Eliza, do you remember anything else? About where you were? Who kept you there? The girl's lips trembled. Not everything, she whispered. But I remember the humming, the white rooms, and the men who never used their real names. Her fingers brushed Valor's fur. But he wasn't like them. Riley leaned in. Eliza, what did they call the place? Eliza hesitated, her voice a breath. Halcyon. Riley closed her eyes. It wasn't a myth. It never had been. And now, it had a face, a victim, and a dog who never forgot. The rain had started again, light, steady, like it didn't want to disturb the silence inside the hospital room. It tapped against the window pane in rhythm, with a slow, quiet beeping of Eliza's heart monitor. The world outside kept moving, but inside this room, time hung still. Eliza sat upright now, pale arms tucked beneath a thin fleece blanket. Her hair had been brushed out, but it clung to her temples in damp waves. She hadn't said a word since the morning, not to the nurses, not to the psychiatrist they'd brought in. But now, as Valor lay curled on the tile floor beside her bed, his head resting beside her dangling fingers, something had changed. Riley sat across from her, not as an officer, but simply as someone who knew how it felt to be haunted. "You said he protected you," Riley said softly. Eliza's eyes didn't blink. They stayed fixed on Valor's ears, which twitched every time the IV machine clicked. "Eliza," Riley tried again. "Can you tell me what you remember? Even just a piece?" Silence. Then barely audible. "His name wasn't Valor." Riley leaned in. "What was it?" Eliza shook her head. "We weren't allowed to say it, but I called him Seven. Because of the patch." Her voice broke on the last word. "They stitched it into his fur." Riley's stomach turned. "I would talk to him when I couldn't sleep," Eliza continued. "He never left the corner of my room. He didn't bark. Not unless the man came in." Riley watched her closely. "Which man?" Eliza blinked, slowly. "He wore shoes that made no sound." Her fingers trembled beneath the blanket. "He didn't yell. That was the worst part. He would just breathe heavy and say, 'Turn around.' Sometimes he brought lights. Other times, music." A long pause. Valor's breathing deepened, as if he too were holding memory inside the pause. "But Seven, he knew." Eliza looked down, whispering, like she was telling a secret to the floor. "He'd growl, real low like the floor was shaking." Riley nodded slowly, heart thudding. "Did the man hurt you?" Eliza's chin twitched. Then, finally, she nodded. "He tried to, until Seven lunged." "M?" She held up her hand, showing a faint crescent scar between her thumb and forefinger. "The man had something like a rod. He raised it once, but Seven caught his wrist." Her eyes met Riley's for the first time in hours. "He didn't bark. He didn't bite unless he had to, but he never took his eyes off him." Riley looked at Valor, who hadn't moved, but his ears now angled subtly back, as if he remembered. "Eliza," Riley said, her voice trembling. "How long were you in there?" "I don't know," she whispered. "The lights were always on. There was no window. They gave us numbers, not birthdays." "And the dog, Seven, was always with you?" Eliza nodded. "He came after the second girl disappeared. She cried too much. Then one day, she was gone. After that, they put Seven in my room. I think they were trying something new, seeing if we bonded." Tears finally began to brim in her eyes. "He wasn't supposed to love me, but he did." Riley swallowed hard. "I stopped crying after that," Eliza said. "Because if I did, he would come stand next to me. And they hated that." She looked back at Valor. "They took him away before the fire, before everything burned. I thought maybe they killed him." Riley's voice caught in her throat. "But he found you." Eliza nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. "He remembered." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the ticking of the clock and the whisper of rain on the window. Riley finally stood and crossed the room. She sat at the edge of Eliza's bed and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're safe now," she said. "And so is he." But even as she said it, Riley's thoughts turned inward. If this was true, if Project Halcyon used Tier 7 dogs like Valor not just for defense but connection, then this wasn't just trauma. It was design. Someone had created a bond between a child and a canine, not for comfort, but for data, observation, emotion as programming. And now, that same someone was out there, possibly watching. As Riley rose to leave, Valor stood too. But instead of following, he stepped forward and rested his head in Eliza's lap. She froze then, slowly, almost reverently, placed her hand on his head. For the first time, A small smile crept across her cracked lips. "He used to do that when the lights went out." End quote. Riley turned at the doorway and watched in silence. In that still frame, the girl and the dog, trauma and protector, something unspoken passed between them. And Riley knew this was only the beginning. The hallway outside Eliza's room smelled faintly of antiseptic and brewed coffee. But to Riley, it smelled like memory. She leaned against the cool tile wall, letting the soft click of IV wheels and the murmur of nurses fade behind her. Her hands trembled not from adrenaline, but from something deeper, older. Valor sat at her feet, silent. He didn't nudge her or look up, but his presence was grounding, like the stillness before a storm. Riley closed her eyes, and she was 10 again. The wind through the wheat fields outside their farmhouse always whistled around dusk. Her brother Caleb used to say it was the sound of ghosts learning to sing. He was 12, imaginative, always drawing monsters in the margins of his notebooks, naming the stars before he knew their constellations. And then one day, he was just gone. No trace, no scream, no clue. Just his bike lying in the ditch, one wheel still spinning when they found it. The sheriff at the time said maybe he ran away. Her father knew better. So did Riley. Something had taken him. Back then, they had a dog, Finn. A mutt, mostly black lab. He'd gone wild that night, barking like he saw something that Riley and her parents couldn't. He scratched at the barn door until his paws bled. Then, 3 days later, he disappeared too. Riley remembered her mom sitting on the porch steps, silent, holding Caleb's baseball glove like it could bring him home. Her dad didn't speak for weeks. And Riley began writing down everything, every sound, every shadow, every strange car that had passed through town that week. It became an obsession, and when she turned 16, she applied for a police internship, not because she wanted to wear the badge, but because she wanted to know what could make a boy disappear without a sound. Know what could make a dog go mad from grief. Now, all those years later, she stood in a hospital hallway listening to a girl whisper about masked men, about dogs who weren't supposed to love, about underground rooms and flickering lights, and a dog, Valor, who found her again. Riley crouched beside him. Her fingers touched the fur behind his ear, slow and thoughtful. "You remember more than you should," she whispered. Valor's eyes flicked to her, steady, watchful, almost knowing. She leaned her forehead against his, just briefly. "What if you're not the only one?" Her mind raced. Tier 7. Emotional bonding. Memory retention. What if what happened to Eliza had happened before? To other children? To Caleb? A cold dread settled into her gut. What if she'd been asking the wrong questions all these years? What if it wasn't about who took her brother, but why? She stood and walked to the end of the hallway, pulling out her phone. Her fingers hesitated above the screen, then began typing a search string only she would know. Caleb Bennett. Missing persons. June sept. 2002. Rural, Illinois. Keywords: dog, project, classified. A few public articles came up, old archived scans from small-town newspapers. She knew them all. But then something flickered at the bottom of the page. A forum thread. Obscure. Buried. Title: MK Tier Dogs, Conspiracy or Truth. She tapped it. There, among the deluge of fringe theories and tinfoil posts, was a comment from 5 years ago. "My brother vanished in 2002. His dog started growling days before. No one believed me. Someone said they saw a military van near the edge of the wheat line. Project name mentioned Halcyon." Riley's throat dried. The username was anonymized. No replies. Just left there like a breadcrumb in a forest no one dared to enter. She copied it and saved it, then stared out the window, watching rain blur the lights of the city. Valor came to stand beside her, tail still, eyes fixed on her reflection. She looked at him not as a partner, not as a piece of evidence, but as a witness, a survivor. "You know something," she murmured, "and you've been trying to tell us since the day we found you." And in that instant, something clicked. Not logically, but intuitively. Valor hadn't led them to Eliza by chance. He had remembered her. Not just her scent, not just a trigger. He remembered the weight of her voice in the dark, the fear, the silent nights when he stood guard. Which meant If he could remember her, maybe he remembered others. Maybe even a boy named Caleb. She turned from the window, her jaw set with something she hadn't felt in years. Conviction. This wasn't just another case. This wasn't a rescue. This was a door creaking open, a second chance to find answers for the ghosts of her past. And this time, she wasn't a little girl with a notebook. She was the one with the badge, and the dog who never forgot. The train yard on the outskirts of Marlow hadn't seen a cargo shipment in nearly 2 decades. Rust bled down the sides of every container, and weeds cracked through the concrete like veins in dying skin. It was quiet out here, too, quiet for someone with nothing to hide. Riley pulled the cruiser up beside a half-buried shipping container painted with the faded number 17. Valor sat alert in the passenger seat, ears forward, his body tense but not afraid. He knew something waited in the stillness. She stepped out slowly, scanning the perimeter, broken-down forklifts, skeletal frames of trucks, and the faint smell of scorched oil. Then she heard the low, deliberate growl of a dog, deep and ragged. From the shadows of a leaning metal silo, a German shepherd emerged. Gray-flecked, older, blind in one eye. His stance was protective, not hostile. Behind him, a door creaked open with the sound of old hinges giving in. "You brought a K9, a man's voice said, slow and measured. "That's how I know you're not one of them." Riley kept her hand near her sidearm, but didn't reach for it. "I'm looking for Martin Reyes." "You found him," the voice replied. The man who stepped out looked like the scrapyard had tried to claim him. Jacket torn at one shoulder, hands calloused, hair overgrown into a salt and pepper halo. But his eyes, sharp, sunken, alert, carried the weight of someone who hadn't slept properly in years. "I'm Officer Riley Bennett. This is Valor." She nodded to the K9 at her side. Martin glanced at the dog. His gaze narrowed. "That one's Tier 7, isn't he?" Riley stiffened.
"So it's true."
Martin exhaled like someone pulling out a memory he'd tried to forget. They were never supposed to surface again. He pushed open the door farther. "Come inside, before someone sees you." The inside of the workshop smelled like metal filings, motor oil, and old paper. Blueprints hung like tired ghosts on the walls. A space heater buzzed in the corner. The older dog, Martin's, curled near a wood stove, watching them with a single, milky eye. "His name's Bishop," Martin said, nodding toward the dog. "Tier 4, half vision now, but heart like a war drum." Riley crouched beside Valor, who remained quiet but alert. She could sense it, some unspoken recognition between the dogs. Not familiarity, but a shared language built on silence and training and long-forgotten commands. "I need information about Project Halcyon," she said. Martin didn't answer. He poured 2 cups of instant coffee, slid one across the table, and then sat. "I burned every file they didn't already take. What you're asking for isn't history. It's a scar." "Then show me the scar." He stared at her. "People died to bury what you're digging up. Some of them had no choice. Some of them had names I can't forget." Riley leaned forward. "A girl named Eliza was found in a bricked-in basement. She said Valor protected her. She remembered him, and he remembered her. That shouldn't be possible." Martin's hand trembled slightly as he lifted his mug. "Unless he was Tier 7. "He is," she said. His collar had a hidden tag, property of Project Halcyon, Tier 7. For a moment, Martin looked like he was staring through time. Tier 7 wasn't about obedience. It was about imprinting, emotional retention, memory loops. We didn't just condition them, we bonded them to trauma. It anchored the memory. Riley's voice lowered. "So Valor wasn't just trained to guard her. He was wired to remember her." Martin nodded slowly. "They were designed to remember faces, smells, pain, the kind of things that leave marks no scan can trace." "Why?" she asked, her voice sharp now. "Why would you build something like that?" He looked away. "Because monsters hide in plain sight, officer. And we needed witnesses no one would think to silence." The silence between them thickened. "I didn't stay until the end," Martin admitted. "When they started experimenting on children, I walked." "Children?" Riley's blood chilled. "Eliza wasn't the only one?" Martin stood and walked to a wall panel. He pried it open and pulled out a metal lockbox. layered with dust and scorched on one side. He set it on the table. I buried this the night I disappeared. Most of what's in here is corrupted, but there are a few names, a few logs. He pushed it toward her. Don't thank me. Don't even believe me if you don't want to. But that dog you have? He's not just a partner. He's a map. And he remembers more than anyone ever should. Riley opened the box. Inside were USB drives, a yellowing manila folder labeled Tier 7, Neural Link Candidates, and a black and white photo of a young boy with a birthmark on his cheek. The same face Eliza had sketched. Her throat tightened. Who's this? Martin's voice dropped. Dr. Noah Leland, lead architect of the bonding protocol. Dead, supposedly. But that photo was taken 6 months after the project was shut down. Riley felt the weight of the box like a bomb in her lap. Outside, Valor let out a single low growl, deep in his chest. Not threat, not fear, but memory. She looked at Martin. I'm not walking away from this. He nodded like he already knew. Then you'd better brace for what comes next. The morning fog had lifted, but the chill remained seeping through Riley's jacket as she followed Martin through the scrapyard's backlot. Every step crunched on gravel and brittle weeds. Bishop, the half-blind German shepherd, limped behind them, a silent witness to memory. Martin moved slowly, shovel in hand, pausing at a clearing beneath a leaning transmission tower. The ground here looked disturbed like it had once been forgotten, then remembered in regret. You're sure about this? Riley asked. Martin nodded, pressing the blade into earth already softened by guilt. I swore I'd never unbury this. Thought if I left it in the dirt long enough, the past would stay there too. Valor stood a few feet away, nose to the wind, tail still not alert, not fearful, just aware, as if he knew what was under there already. The shovel struck something solid. Martin cleared away the loose earth and unearthed a tarnished steel briefcase. It was dented along the side, rust creeping up its hinges like ivy. He knelt beside it, brushing off the last of the soil. Everything the government erased, everything they didn't want, traced its in here, he murmured. At least, what I managed to salvage before it all went dark. Riley dropped to one knee and reached forward slowly, her fingers pausing on the latch. There was something ritualistic about it, like opening a tomb. Click! The case hissed open. Inside, a tangle of memory lay dormant plastic-sleeved documents. Aged Polaroids, faded dossiers, and a cluster of black data chips labeled with numbers and tier codes. The unmistakable smell of time dust, old ink, mildew rushed out, like breath held too long. Martin pointed to a slim manila folder, that one. Riley pulled it free and flipped it open. Her eyes scanned the top of the first page. Tier 7, Subject 5, O13, Advanced Neural Retention Canine. Breed, German Shepherd. Codename, Valor. She froze. Below it, a chart detailed test dates, behavioral trials, and something that made her chest tighten. Emotional tethering threshold. Exceeded. Subject now retains traumatic visual and auditory triggers beyond expected parameters. She looked up at Martin. They knew. He nodded grimly. They engineered it that way. Tier 7 wasn't a fluke, it was the goal. The idea was to create dogs that didn't just obey, but remembered down to scent and expression. The kind of memory that survives a purge, even when the evidence doesn't. Riley turned another page. A black and white photo had been stapled to the corner. A younger Valor ears still oversized for his head, a military tag clipped to his collar. Standing beside him, hand on the pup's shoulder, was a man with sharp cheekbones and a clipped expression. Dr. Noah Leland. Handwritten notes, scribbled in red ink, sprawled across the margins. Responds emotionally to Subject E47. Initial imprint confirmed. Eliza, Riley whispered. Martin nodded again, slower this time. They used her to bond him. She wasn't just a prisoner, she was part of the experiment, an anchor. Riley's throat closed. She sifted through more pages, most marked classified or smudged with old water damage, but it was all there. Project Halcyon's objectives, the breakdown of tier systems, even early ethical complaints filed and promptly ignored. Then came the video stills, black and white grainy frames printed from surveillance. One showed a child huddled in a concrete cell, a dog sitting guard just beyond the bars. Valor. Even from that angle, Riley could feel the weight in the dog's posture. He wasn't just guarding, he was grieving. Martin handed her one of the data chips. These are memory logs, encrypted neural frames. If you have the right interface, and I still do, you can decode them into visual projections. What the dogs saw, what they felt. It's raw and dangerous. Dangerous how? Because memory is evidence, and evidence gets people killed. He sat back on his heels. I didn't build Tier 7 to hurt anyone, Riley. I built it to keep the truth from dying. But the program got hijacked. Leland twisted it, took the dogs from guardians to accomplices in silence. Riley closed the briefcase gently, as if afraid the past might spill out and flood the present. And now Valor's remembering, she said, spontaneously, without triggers, without control. That's not spontaneous, Martin said quietly. That's trauma that never left. A soft rustle behind them made her turn. Valor had crept closer, resting on his haunches, watching them with the intensity of a soldier hearing old war songs. Martin met the dog's eyes. He remembers the girl. And if he does, that means the emotional tether held. That means he's the last living witness. Riley looked at Valor, at the briefcase, then at the dirt where it had been buried. They thought they could kill the program, she murmured. But they didn't count on the dog surviving. Martin gave her a sideways glance. They never do. Even after they'd reburied the briefcase, the wind in the scrapyard didn't seem to move. The clouds above had thickened, pressing the sky down like a weight Riley could feel between her shoulders. She sat on the rusted tailgate of an old Ford pickup, documents in hand, eyes vacant. Valor lay curled beside the wheel, his ears twitching with every distant creak of metal. He hadn't taken his eyes off Martin since they returned. Martin stood a few feet away, pouring black coffee from a thermos into a cracked enamel mug. His hands trembled slightly, not from cold, from something older than regret, older than guilt. You want the rest of it, he said finally, handing the cup to Riley. She nodded. I need to know everything. Martin leaned against the passenger side door. His other German shepherd, Bishop, had lain down near Valor. The two dogs sharing some silent agreement neither human could fully read. I used to believe in the sanctity of memory, Martin said, voice dry. That what we remember, what we carry, makes us human. So we built a program. We called it Halcyon. The name was a lie, of course. We promised serenity while constructing trauma. Riley said nothing, just waited. I was brought in to oversee Tier 7 after Tier 6 proved unstable. The problem wasn't obedience, it was forgetting. The dogs could learn, but they couldn't retain context. No emotional weight. So we engineered retention pathways. Not just neural, emotional. He stared off into the distance, where the scrapyard gave way to dead trees and the outline of a forgotten rail line. We wanted them to feel fear, feel pain, so they'd know when it was wrong. Riley looked up slowly. You're saying you gave them trauma? No, he replied. We let them experience it, and then didn't stop it. We studied which triggers anchored best what kind of emotion-cemented memory. Turns out, the strongest isn't love. It's helplessness. It's watching someone suffer when you can't intervene. Her stomach turned. Eliza. Martin nodded, almost imperceptibly. She was brought in under something called E-Series testing. Not officially approved. Not even on the books I kept. Leland took the liberty. Said imprinting needed a human constant. A child. Easier to control. Easier to manipulate. Riley clenched the cup tighter. Her knuckles turned white. She wasn't just a victim, Martin continued. She was a variable. A tool to activate Valor's higher empathy pathways. The dog didn't learn to guard her because we trained him. He chose her because he saw what they did. And the worst part he never forgot. He looked over at Valor now. The dog had raised his head, watching the exchange, not blinking. He used to howl after those sessions, Martin said, quieter. Not bark, not growl, just this mournful, bone-deep sound. At first we thought it was conditioning, but it wasn't. It was grief. Riley swallowed hard. And you let it happen. I did worse, Martin whispered. I recorded it, filed it under phase response vocalization. Like it was data, not agony. The wind picked up for the first time in hours, whistling between stacked towers of old car doors and mufflers. You want to know the line? he asked her suddenly. She looked up. The line between science and atrocity? It's silence. It's when you see something you know is wrong and say nothing because you're wearing a lab coat instead of a badge. He pushed away from the truck and walked a few paces, as if putting distance between himself and his own confession. They told us dogs forget. That's what they always say. They live in the moment. They don't hold on. But Valor held on. He remembered the sounds, the smells, the cries, and he carried them. Ember-free. Riley watched him with a different lens, now not just as the engineer behind a shadow program, but as a man who'd once believed he was doing good and had woken up too late. "Why didn't you destroy it?" she asked. "The briefcase, the data. Why bury it?" "Because part of me knew someone would come looking," Martin said. "Someone like you, someone the program couldn't break. I was too much a coward to bring it to light myself, but I couldn't erase it either." He turned toward her. "And because Valor deserved a witness." Silence stretched again. Valor rose and padded closer, his steps measured. He stopped beside Riley, sitting so close their shoulders touched. "I watched him decline after the project shut down," Martin said. "He was reassigned to municipal police with wiped logs, but no one knew what lingered. He went through 3 handlers before Riley. Bit one. Refused to obey another. They said he was defective." "Oh." Riley placed a hand gently on Valor's back, stroking the fur behind his ear. The dog leaned into it not like a pet, but like someone who finally recognized safety. "He's not defective," she said softly. "He's haunted." Martin's eyes welled, but he didn't wipe them. "So am I." The scrapyard fell into quiet again. No traffic, no birds. Just the echo of words finally spoken after too many years. "What do I do with all this?" Riley asked after a long moment. Martin didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was barely audible. "You decide whether the truth is heavier than the silence, and then you carry it." She looked down at Valor. The dog met her gaze not with obedience, but something older, something human, understanding. The walls were too white. Not sterile, just empty, like they were waiting for someone to write the truth on them. Room 309 overlooked the corner of Eastmont Children's Hospital, where the trees bent in the afternoon wind like old men remembering something they never told. Eliza sat upright in bed, knees drawn to her chest, her IV line taped gently along the underside of her arm. She hadn't said a word in 2 days. Not to the nurses, not to the social worker, not to the psychologist, only to Valor, and only in silence. Riley sat in the plastic chair across from her, notebook open, pen untouched. Her badge rested beside a styrofoam cup of cooling coffee. Her jacket still smelled faintly of motor oil and scrapyard air, a reminder of Martin Rhea's haunted truth. But right now, that world, the briefcase, the data, the guilt, felt far away. Here, in this room, there were only 3 of them: Eliza, Riley, and the dog who wouldn't look away. Valor lay stretched across the cool tile, head resting between his paws, body motionless but alert. His eyes were on Eliza the entire time, not analyzing, not demanding, just present. Riley leaned forward slightly. "They said you asked for me." Eliza didn't nod, didn't blink, but her hand moved. She reached slowly for the edge of the nightstand and pulled a sheet of paper toward her. A dull crayon blue had been left beside it. She didn't look at either adult in the room, just began to draw. Slow, deliberate strokes. A corridor. No windows. Thick doors with small square grates. A narrow hallway, almost suffocating in its angles. Fluorescent lights overhead, captured as jagged rectangles. At the far end of the page, a staircase spiraling downward. Another page. This time, a room with a table. 4 walls. Men in white coats. No faces. Just masks. One man stood closest to a steel bed with straps drawn tight. A third page. A cage. In the corner, a black-furred dog, standing guard. Riley didn't interrupt. She watched as Eliza drew like someone exhaling, like the only way she could let it out was through color and shape. Then, on the final page, Eliza drew herself. Small, curled, in the corner of a room with no windows. The floor beneath her was covered in tally marks, so many it bled into black. Riley's voice broke the quiet, barely above a whisper. "You remember it all, don't you?" Eliza paused. Then, for the first time, She looked up not at Riley, but at Valor. Her lips parted just slightly. And then she said something, not loudly, not fully, just a whisper carried by the sound of breath, more than voice. He was there, he growled when they came too close. Valor rose slowly, almost reverently. He stepped closer to the side of the bed, not rushing, not wagging, just standing like a soldier waiting for orders that never came. Eliza reached out her hand. It trembled. She placed it on his head, and then she spoke again. His name wasn't Valor back then. Riley's breath hitched. She didn't push, just waited. They called him Rook, Eliza murmured. But he hated that name, I could tell. So I called him something else. I called him Safe. The words fell like a stone into a silent lake, and then rippled out. Riley swallowed the knot in her throat. Eliza, she said softly, those drawings, those rooms, do you remember where? The girl shook her head. They moved me a lot, but I remember the stairs. They always smelled like bleach and metal. Riley took out her phone and snapped quick, silent photos of the drawings. Each one was a window into something deeper, and she needed to study them later, connect them to maps, facilities, blueprints. Anything. Why me? She asked quietly. Why ask for me? Eliza looked at her, eyes sunken but steady. Because he trusts you. He only growled once, when that man tried to touch me. But when you came near, he didn't growl. She reached again, this time for a crayon red, the first color she'd used outside of black or blue. She circled Riley's figure on one of the pages she'd just drawn. The outline of a woman entering the hallway. And above her head, Eliza scribbled something faint. A key. You're the one he chose, she whispered. Riley blinked, caught off guard. Chose for what? Eliza didn't answer. But Valor did something strange. Something small. He licked the girl's wrist right where the bruises hadn't yet faded. A gesture not of affection but absolution. The late afternoon light had softened to amber when Nurse Hallowell entered room 309. She moved with a gentleness that came not from training, but from experience, years of caring for the broken, the voiceless, the waiting. Eliza was asleep, curled on her side with one arm resting gently over Valor's thick fur. He didn't move, didn't twitch, but his eyes followed every step the nurse made. Hey, buddy, Hallowell whispered to the dog with a faint smile. I'm just here to check her vitals. Riley, seated in the corner chair with a file folder across her knees, gave a nod. She hadn't left the room in hours. Something about the stillness here, the girl, the dog, the silence, demanded presence. The nurse adjusted the blanket, carefully peeled back the edge of Eliza's gown to inspect a fading bruise, then paused. What's that? She murmured. Beneath the waistband of the child's clothes, a pocket, crudely sewn into the inside seam. Hallowell reached in and pulled out something wrapped in gauze and tape, hidden like a secret someone had desperately wanted to keep. She unwrapped it layer by layer. Inside was a small, tarnished music box, the kind you might find in an antique store. Carved wood, edges worn smooth by time. A faded engraving on the lid read, For E. It must have been hers, the nurse said quietly, placing it on the tray. Strange thing to keep through all that, but Valor had already risen. His body stiffened, not aggressive, not protective, but alert, as if he knew what it was before anyone touched it. Riley leaned forward. Wait, don't open it yet. But Hallowell had already twisted the key. Click. Click. Chime. A tune began to play. 3 soft, descending notes. Then a waltz-like pattern. Slow, repetitive, innocent, almost. But Valor's reaction was anything but. His ears shot back. His tail dropped flat against the floor. A low, rumbling growl built in his chest, not aimed at anyone, but toward the air itself, as though the sound alone triggered something long buried. Valor, Riley whispered, standing. Hey, look at me. But he didn't blink. He was locked. Not in fear, but in memory. He stepped backward once, then turned his head toward the window, away from the sound. Then, without warning, he howled. Not loud, not wild, just once. A single, mournful cry. Eliza stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, confused, then frightened. No, turn it off, she whispered. "Please. It means they're coming." Riley slammed the lid shut. The music stopped mid-note. Silence returned, like a held breath. Eliza sat up, clutching Valor's fur. "They used to play that before." "Before what, sweetheart?" Riley asked softly. The girl shook her head, trembling. "Before the doors opened. Embring." Riley looked down at the box, now silent and still. "You've heard it before?" Eliza nodded. "In the dark. Before they took someone. They said it helped the dogs focus." Hallowell's face had gone pale. "It's a trigger?" Riley said nothing at first, then slowly picked up the box and turned it over. Inside the base, barely visible, was a stamped serial number and a set of small etched letters. HXNP7. AU. Riley blinked. HXN. Halcyon. Tier 7. It wasn't a music box. Not really. It was a cue. She gently wrapped it in a towel and placed it inside her satchel. Valor had calmed now, lying down again at the foot of the bed, his eyes on Eliza like a lighthouse waiting for a storm. Riley crouched beside him, one hand brushing along his back. "You remember the sound, don't you?" she murmured. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, just a breath, she swore there was something human behind them. Not language, not logic, just memory, echoing where words could not go. Riley didn't notice the black sedan until the third night. It was parked across the street from the hospital, under a dying street lamp that flickered every few seconds. The driver never got out, never smoked, never checked a phone. Just sat there, engine off, as if waiting for the air itself to shift. At first, she thought it was coincidence. Second night, different car. Same corner, same stillness. Third night, her gut turned to stone. That's when she stopped chalking it up to paranoia. She wasn't the type to rattle easily. Years in law enforcement had taught her how to spot a tail, how to breathe through fear, how to dismiss ghosts conjured by sleepless nights. But this wasn't nerves. This was presence. Watching. Waiting. A kind of silence that felt like pressure on the skin. Back inside the hospital, Eliza was asleep. Valor curled beneath her cot like a sentry made of breath and bone. He hadn't stirred since dusk, but Riley had seen the change. He was more alert, more reactive, even to silence, especially to silence. She stepped into the hallway, phone in her coat pocket, keys gripped like brass knuckles. Nurse Hallowell nodded at her from the station desk. "You heading out?" "Just for a minute," Riley murmured. "Need some air." The elevator was too slow. She took the stairs. Outside, the parking lot was mostly empty. Her boots clicked softly against the pavement as she walked to her truck. She didn't get in, just leaned on the side panel and watched. The sedan was still there. Black, windows, tinted to near mirror. It hadn't moved. Riley turned slightly, pretending to scroll her phone, and tapped a quick command into a secure app only a few in the department still knew how to use. A partial plate capture. Time-stamped photo. No match. Of course. A cold breeze came through the lot, carrying the smell of rain and exhaust. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Not Valor. A stray. Maybe. Or a warning. She got in her truck, but didn't turn the engine. Just sat, eyes on the rear view. 5 minutes. 10. The sedan didn't move, but someone in it was watching. She could feel it the way you feel, the weight of eyes in the back of your skull. Whoever they were, they didn't want to be seen, but they didn't care if she noticed. That was the message. "We see you, and we don't need to hide." She turned on the engine, slowly pulled out, and looped the block once. The sedan didn't follow. But the next night, it was back. And the night after that, it was a white van. No plates. Parked outside her precinct. Same corner. Someone wanted her to know they were there. Someone who didn't like questions about Halcyon. Not long after, Martin Reyes stopped answering her texts. She tried calling voicemail. Tried his landline disconnected. When she drove out to the scrapyard the next day, it was empty. Gates locked. Chain snapped. The old German shepherd he kept was gone too. No sign of struggle. No blood, no fur. Just gone. And in the dirt near the gate, a boot print. Not Martin's. She was sure of that. She took a photo, sent it to forensics. They never got back to her. That night, back at her apartment, Riley sat with Valor by her side and her service weapon on the table. It was too quiet. No hum from the neighbors upstairs. No clatter from the pipes. And in the alley below her window, another car. Different make. Same silence. They weren't just watching anymore. They were closing in. She reached down, her fingers brushing against Valor's neck. He was awake, breathing slow, but his eyes were open. "You feel it too, don't you?" she whispered. He didn't move, but she saw his ear twitch, a dog's way of saying yes. Riley leaned back in her chair, tension wired through her spine like piano string. She had crossed an invisible line. Not just a kidnapping case anymore. Not even a cover-up. This was something else. A system built on silence. And Valor, once a number in a secret project, was the one piece they hadn't accounted for. Not just a weapon, not just a relic. He was remembering. And someone wanted those memories erased before they could become truth. It began just after 2 a.m. Riley was asleep on the couch. Valor curled beneath the window, his breath soft and even. The world outside was wrapped in the hush of early morning, the kind of silence that never quite felt safe anymore. Then came the sound. Not a bark, not a growl, a strangled whimper. Riley bolted upright. Valor was convulsing. His legs kicked out wildly, claws scraping against the hardwood. Froth flecked his jowls, and his eyes, glassed over with something distant, darted wildly behind half-lidded sockets. He wasn't awake, but he wasn't asleep either. "Valor!" she shouted, dropping beside him. He didn't respond. His body arched suddenly, a violent jerk that sent his head crashing into the leg of the table. The thud rang out, cold and sickening. Riley grabbed a blanket, cushioning his head, trying to hold him without hurting him more. "It's okay, boy. I'm here. You're safe. Just hang on, baby. Just hang on." His breathing was erratic. Then, just as quickly as it began, the seizure stopped. He collapsed body limp, eyes flittering. Still alive, barely. The vet's office was quiet when she arrived. Dr. Lenora Hughes had opened the back gate before Riley even finished pulling in. She didn't ask questions. She just held the door open as Riley carried 80 pounds of unconscious history in her arms. Valor's muzzle twitched. His tail gave a slow, almost involuntary flick. "Put him on table 2, Hughes said, "and stay close." Inside, the sterile lights buzzed softly overhead, casting elongated shadows on the white tile. Hughes began a quick neurological scan. Eyes, gums, spine. Her hands were practiced, careful. Her voice was low, murmuring nothings to Valor as she moved. Then her brow furrowed. "What is it?" Riley asked. "He has a scar," Hughes said, fingers probing the base of Valor's neck. "Tiny, surgical, just under the vertebrae. You wouldn't see it unless you were looking for it." Riley's heart dropped. "Keep going," she whispered. Hughes reached for a portable scanner, the kind used to detect microchips. But this wasn't an ordinary check. The moment she swept the wand down Valor's spine, the device let out a sharp beep, followed by a low-pitched hum. A red light blinked twice. Then, a serial code. Hughes leaned in. "That's not a standard implant, and that's not a tracking chip. Not anymore." "What is it?" Riley asked, but part of her already knew. The vet looked at her. "That's military, or private sector pretending to be military. Something custom. The kind of tech they stop talking about once funding disappears." Riley stared at the numbers. "Project Halcyon," she breathed. Hughes blinked. "Excuse me? I need that implant removed. Or disabled. Anything. Whatever you can do without hurting him." "I can't promise anything," Hughes said quietly. "It's near his spinal cord. Removing it could paralyze him." Riley's fingers trembled. She clenched them into a fist. "Then scan it," she said. "Dump the data. Copy the signal. I don't care if it's encrypted. Just get something. Anything that tells me what they did to him." Valor whimpered softly on the table. One eye opened. He looked at her, and for a second, just a breath. He wasn't just a dog. He was a soldier, waking from a war no one knew he'd fought. 3 hours later, Hughes handed Riley a flash drive. It scrambled. But it's there. Something's been pulsing from that chip in timed intervals. "I'll send it to a friend at MIT. Off the books." Quietly. Riley stared at the drive in her palm. It felt heavier than it should. "What do you think it's doing?" she asked. Why would a dog need a signal inside his spine? Hughes glanced over at Valor resting now, breathing steady, his head on a towel like a child finally asleep after crying. "Sometimes," she said, "they don't implant to track. They implant to store. Memories, commands, triggers, sensory loops. We've done it with rats, with dolphins, even crows. Valor, he may have carried more than just training." Riley looked down at him, her voice low. He was never supposed to remember her, but he did. "Then maybe," Hughes said, "they built something too smart for its own leash." Outside, the first light of dawn crept across the sky. But for Riley, it felt like the world was getting darker. The chipped flash drive clicked into place. Martin Reyes didn't speak as the screen flickered alive. The air in his makeshift lab, a dusty trailer retrofitted with salvage tech and fading schematics, was thick with static and memory. Rain tapped softly against the tin roof, a rhythm that seemed to echo something older. Something deeper. Riley stood behind him, arms folded, jaw tight. Valor lay on the floor nearby, resting but alert, his ears flicking every few seconds at sounds only he could truly hear. The old man typed a command line with trembling fingers. "Most chips like this are encrypted on multiple levels," he murmured. "But this isn't just encryption. It's a map, a neural one." He tapped again, then froze. On screen, a three-dimensional rendering of what looked like a brain flickered into life, pulsing with faint blue and red nodes. Each point shimmered with intensity, linking to hundreds of others through luminous filaments, like constellations inside a living sky. He paused. "This is not data storage. It's memory retention. Functional. Real-time." Riley leaned forward. "You mean Valor remembers? Like we do?" Martin shook his head. "Number. Not like we do. More precise, more structured. Someone taught his mind to catalog trauma like a camera, only with feelings attached. Fear, pain, sound. But this?" He tapped again. The view zoomed in. A cluster of red pulses glowed at the base of the diagram, each labeled with a date, a time. Then, Tier 7. Subject V.47. A file opened. Video. It was grainy. Monochrome. A hallway. Stark white. Metal doors. Fluorescent lights humming like a hive. Then movement. A child's voice. "No, please." The screen trembled as if the lens had flinched. The camera didn't move, but the angle shifted. And suddenly, there she was. A little girl, maybe 6, barefoot, knees scraped, huddled in the corner of a concrete room behind rusted bars. Her arms wrapped tight around her torso, rocking back and forth. The footage wasn't shot by a human. It was Valor's eyes. "You're watching from his POV," Martin whispered. "That's why it tilts like that. That's his head. That's his breath fogging the lens." Riley said nothing. Her fingers dug into her arms. On screen, a man entered the room. His face was blurred either by accident or deliberate programming. He yelled, "Step forward." The girl screamed. Valor's memory wavered. The screen shuddered. Then came the sound. Low, throaty. A growl so visceral it made the air in the trailer tighten. The man paused, backed away. And Valor, though just a camera in this instance, took one step forward, protectively. "I know that sound," Riley said. "He still makes it, when he feels someone's afraid." Martin nodded. "They didn't train that. That's imprinting." He wasn't just observing her. He was bonding. The video cut off. Back on the neural map, other pulses blinked. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Difrodat, difrosik. Martin zoomed out. They trained these dogs to catalog every moment of significance. Every time she cried. Every time the door opened. Every time he growled to stop it from going further. Why? Riley's voice was brittle. "Why program a dog to remember that?" Martin hesitated. Because, in a place like Halcyon, the dog was the only witness that couldn't testify. Quote. He clicked open another node. This time, Eliza was older, maybe 9, her hair matted, skin pale. She was drawing on the wall with a piece of chalk. Valor sat outside the bars. She was humming a melody, soft, broken. Then she reached out through the bars and placed her hand on his snout. The screen held on that frame. Her tiny fingers splayed against the dark fur. Connection. Then static. Martin leaned back in his chair. The glow of the monitor illuminated the lines under his eyes like cracks in old stone. "I shut down my work after Halcyon folded," he whispered. "I thought Tier 7 had been destroyed. But this Valor wasn't just the last. He was the most advanced." Riley didn't speak. She walked to Valor and knelt beside him. His eyes met hers. "You knew her," she said softly. "Even when you shouldn't have. Even when they told you not to." Valor gave a faint whine. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. She looked back at Martin. "These memories. Can you extract more?" He hesitated. "Yes. But Riley, what you're asking for might destroy him. The deeper I go, the more he relives. This isn't just video. It's experience. Emotion. Pain." "I know," she said. "But we have to understand what happened to her. And to him. This isn't just about justice anymore." She reached up and gently touched Valor's collar, her fingers brushing the tag that still read Tier 7. "It's about truth." Outside, the rain began to fall harder. And inside the trailer, the past had finally found its voice. The storm hadn't let up. Wind swept across the outskirts of the scrapyard, rattling loose chains and moaning through twisted steel frame. Inside the trailer, the air was still taut, as if the rain knew better than to interrupt what was about to be said. Martin Reyes stood over the console, back to Riley, eyes fixed on the screen, still glowing with the flickering neural map of Valor's memories. "You asked what Tier 7 meant," he said finally, his voice almost drowned by thunder. Riley didn't move. She sat on a metal chair, Valor resting at her feet, his breathing slow but watchful. Her hand gently touched the top of his neck, where the fur met the scarred skin over the implant. The weight of what they'd uncovered was still settling. Martin turned, his eyes hollowed by time, guilt, and the weight of things never meant to be spoken aloud. "Tier 7 wasn't about obedience," he said. "It wasn't about speed, strength, or attack reflexes. That was Tier 4, maybe 5. Tier 7 was about memory." He paused, swallowed hard. "About emotion." Riley frowned. "Emotion?" Martin nodded. Halcyon had one goal: create a K9 unit that could not just act, but remember. Not as a trick, not as training, but as imprinting like children do. The dog wouldn't just know your scent. It would know your pain, your tone, the quiver in your breath when you were scared, the face of the man who hurt you. He tapped a shaky finger on the screen. "And it would remember it for life." Riley's hand unconsciously curled into Valor's fur. "Valor wasn't protecting Eliza because he was trained to," Martin said more quietly now. "He was protecting her because he remembered her." There was a long silence. Then Riley spoke, almost a whisper. "So, the growl, the way he stood between her and the door, wasn't command," Martin finished. "It was grief, trauma, memory, loyalty forged in suffering." He moved toward a rusted drawer near the back and pulled out a folder, thick with faded notes and smeared ink. He set it on the desk and opened it slowly, as if disturbed pages might scream. He flipped through schematics diagrams of canine neural pathways, testing charts, emotional stimulus patterns. One sheet stood out. Project Halcyon, Tier 7, Emotional Response Conditioning. It showed a chart with 2 columns: child, subject, and canine unit. Lines between them mapped physiological and psychological changes: cortisol, oxytocin, heart rate synchronization. "They used children," Riley said hoarsely. "To test this?" Martin's voice cracked. "Yes! Not just children, traumatized children, ones that wouldn't be missed. They found the most broken bonds and tried to replicate love, or something close to it. But love forced into obedience, it curdles." He tapped the last page. Under a faded heading, one phrase was highlighted in red: Tier 7, Emotional Bonding as Weaponized Recall. Riley stared. "They turned loyalty into surveillance," she said. "Turned grief into programming." Martin nodded. "If you bond a dog to a child in trauma, the dog will remember everything that happened to her. And when that child breaks, or disappears, or dies, that memory never leaves. It's more than imprinting. It's haunting. He looked down at Valor, and they called it success. Outside, the storm crackled. Inside, Valor shifted slightly, ears twitching, nose rising. He whined, not loudly, but in that small sound, Riley heard something different. It wasn't the sound of a dog confused. It was the sound of a soul remembering. Martin knelt slowly, eye level with Valor. The dog didn't growl or flinch. He simply looked back. There were only 3, tier 7 second, Martin murmured. One failed, lost control, and turned on its handler. One vanished in the collapse. And one, his hand hovered over Valor's collar, survived. But with every second of it etched into his mind, Riley closed her eyes. This wasn't a program, she said softly. It was a crime scene. And he's the witness. Martin nodded grimly. And like any witness, if someone knows he remembers, they'll want to silence him. Riley stood. Her eyes sharpened. Then we keep him close. We keep him safe. And we listen. She knelt and faced Valor, one hand beneath his chin, eyes level with his. You're not just a dog, are you? She whispered. You're the last survivor of something they wanted forgotten. Valor's eyes didn't blink, but his head pressed against her palm, slow and deliberate, like he understood. The hospital room was dimly lit, just a low glow from the nightlight above the sink and the faint beeping from the monitors behind Eliza's bed. The rain had stopped, but the world outside the window still looked wet, as if the night hadn't quite let go of the day yet. Riley sat by the foot of the bed, scribbling in her own notepad. Not for a report, just a mental map. Names, locations, theories. Every question spun off into another, none of them with answers. Across the room, Eliza was hunched over a small tray table, her head bowed, lips pressed tight, pencil gliding across a blank sheet. It was the only way she would speak. She hadn't said more than 5 full sentences since she'd been brought in, most of them whispered to Valor. But the sketches came like clockwork. At sunrise, after meals, sometimes when no one was watching. Riley glanced over. Eliza's fingers moved with eerie calm, tracing the outline of a man's face. Not like a child's sketch, no cartoon shapes or exaggerated features. These were practiced, repetitive, memorized. A square jaw, thin eyes, wire-rimmed glasses, and then the mark. A strange, marbled shape just under the man's left cheekbone. A birthmark, unmistakable. Riley rose from her chair, slow and cautious, and moved to stand behind the girl. May I? Eliza didn't speak, but her pencil paused. Then she slid the paper over an inch. Permission. Riley studied the image. You've drawn him before. 3 times now. Always the same face. Eliza's voice came quiet as breath. He was there. Every time they changed the lights. Riley can't be there. Changed the lights? Eliza nodded. When they made it. Night. In the room. But it wasn't night. They just turned it dark to scare us. Riley swallowed the rising chill. Did he ever speak? A pause. Then, only to the men in coats, not to us. Riley scanned the details, the edges of the surgical mask, the ID tag that Eliza always left blank in the drawing. But the mark, that wasn't random. Back at headquarters, Riley pulled up the encrypted Halcyon archive, the one Martin Reyes had secretly granted her access to through his outdated laptop. She filtered through the personnel files, looking for any matching facial structure. Over 120 names. 64 photos archived. 47 of them flagged as status deceased. She narrowed in. Birthmark, male, scientific division. Then her eyes stopped. Dr. Noah Leland, former neural conditioning lead, reported dead in a lab explosion 5 years ago. No body recovered. The archived image was almost identical to Eliza's drawing. Same sharp gaze, same pallor, and that same strange mark. Except the file listed him as unrecoverable. Riley leaned back. Either they lied about his death, or someone went to great lengths to bury the truth. She printed the image and returned to Eliza's room. The girl sat cross-legged on the bed, Valor curled at her feet, his head resting gently against her knee like a living anchor. She hadn't noticed Riley enter. "Eliza," Riley said softly, handing her the paper. "Is this him?" Eliza's eyes widened, not in fear, but in that hollow recognition Riley had learned to fear. She nodded once. Riley crouched beside her. "His name is Dr. Noah Leland. Do you remember what he did?" Eliza hesitated, then touched her head with 2 fingers and tapped the back of Valor's neck where the implant had been. "Experiments?" The girl didn't answer, but she began to draw again. This time, not a face. This time, a room. Sterile. Gray. No windows. 1 table. 3 cages. And in the corner, scribbled smaller than the rest, a child, curled up, holding a music box. Riley's chest tightened. It wasn't just one memory. It was many. Layered, like scar tissue. She watched Valor's ear twitch. Then, without a word, the dog stood, walked to Eliza's sketchpad, and lay down with his head beside it, as if guarding the image, as if protecting her from what even paper could summon. Back in the hallway, Riley found herself breathing through clenched teeth. She made a call. Secure line. Straight to Captain Alvarez. "I need to reopen a case file," she said, voice low. "Subject: Noah Leland, Halcyon Project." "Riley, that case is dead." "I don't think so. He's alive. And if I'm right, he didn't just survive the explosion. He disappeared with Tier 7 data and test subjects." A long silence. Then Alvarez spoke. "You have any proof?" Riley looked through the glass at Eliza. "Number. But I have a witness who won't speak, and a dog who won't forget." The call came in just after midnight. Riley had barely closed her eyes when her phone vibrated on the nightstand. The number was unregistered, no caller ID, just static on the other end. But the voice that cut through the crackling silence was unmistakable. "Riley, they found me." Then the line went dead. She was already halfway out the door, gun holstered under her jacket, Valor at her side before she'd even called his name. By the time she reached the edge of the industrial district, the sky was no longer dark. It glowed sickly orange above the scrapyard, smoke curling like the fingers of something ancient and merciless. Fire trucks blocked the road. Police lights strobed through the wreckage. Riley ducked under the caution tape and pushed forward. "Hey, this area's restricted." A young officer barked. Riley flashed her badge, voice tight. "Detective Riley Boone. I need access. Now." The officer hesitated, then nodded. She moved fast, stepping over twisted metal and scorched fence posts. The scrapyard looked gutted not by accident, but intent. There was no sign of natural ignition, no power surges or lightning strikes, just accelerant and silence. The trailer where Martin Reyes had lived for years was now little more than a warped skeleton. The door hung twisted off its hinges. The old lawn chair where he used to sit with his coffee melted to slag. But it was the sound that broke her. A low, broken whine, barely audible under the crackle of embers. She followed it through the haze until she reached the far corner where the kennel had stood, the place where the other dog Ghost had slept. Riley fell to her knees. The kennel was a ruin of melted bars and collapsed sheet metal. But Ghost had tried to shield himself, curled tight under the overhang. His fur was singed, breathing shallow. One paw twitched feebly. Valor let out a whimper and stepped forward. Riley touched Ghost's muzzle gently. "Hold on, boy. Hold on." But the breath stuttered once, then stilled. Gone. Riley sat frozen for a moment, feeling the burn in her throat, the sting behind her eyes. Ghost wasn't just a dog. He was the last thread of whatever piece Martin Reyes had managed to cling to. A silent companion in exile. And now, he was Ash. Bootsteps approached behind her. Martin. His face streaked with soot, one arm cradling a bleeding shoulder. His eyes looked hollow, not from injury, but from something deeper. The kind of loss that ages you all at once. "They were waiting," he rasped. "I took the back trail to get supplies. When I came back..." He didn't finish. Riley helped him sit. Valor remained standing, ears alert, eyes scanning the ruins as if expecting another attack. "Did you see who it was?" she asked. Martin shook his head. "No plates. Black SUV. No lights. But they didn't take anything." Riley frowned. "Nothing?" Martin's jaw clenched. Number, this wasn't about information. She knew what that meant. It was a message, a warning. Not to him, to her. They were watching. They knew she'd found him. They knew about Eliza, about the tag on Valor's collar, about the sketches in the music box. And now, they'd burned it all down to remind her. Some things were never meant to be uncovered. Riley helped Martin into the back of her SUV, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. Paramedics weren't far behind, but they could only treat the surface damage. The real wounds ran deeper. "Why Ghost?" she asked quietly. Martin stared at the smoldering wreckage. He remembered too much. Later that night, Riley sat in her kitchen with a cup of coffee gone cold in her hands. The house was silent, except for the occasional ticking of the clock above the fridge. Valor lay by the window, eyes wide open, unmoving. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the charred remains of Ghost's ID tag, the only thing she'd managed to recover before the flames took the rest. It was bent, blackened, barely legible. But there was one word still intact. Tear. Her breath caught. Ghost had been one of them too. Just before dawn, Riley opened her laptop and accessed Martin's encrypted cloud, a backup he'd created without even trusting his own hardware. It was crude, fragmented, but it contained something she hadn't seen before. A map, or at least the beginning of one. Rough coordinates, satellite pings. Old shipping manifests from a decommissioned airfield outside Amarillo. She traced the route with her finger. It wasn't over. Someone had tried to bury the past with fire, but she still had Valor. And Valor remembered. The sunrise came slow, filtered through smoke still lingering in the folds of Riley's jacket. She hadn't slept. There was no rest left in her body, just adrenaline stretched thin and something sharper than grief pressing behind her ribs. In the silence of early morning, Valor lay curled beneath her kitchen table, muscles twitching in shallow bursts. Whether he dreamed of fire, of Eliza, or of the dark metal corridors where Halcyon once kept its secrets, she didn't know, but she knew this much. Enough was enough. They had burned Martin's life to the ground, had nearly taken Ghost, had left Eliza trembling behind drawn hospital curtains. They weren't just warning her. They were preparing to erase every trace of what remained, and Riley Boone had no intention of letting them. She stood slowly, stretching aching legs, and walked to the window. The old oaks outside whispered in the wind. Somewhere far off, a car passed. But here in this moment there was still time, still choice. She dialed Martin first. "I need you packed in 30 minutes. No arguments." He didn't ask why. Then she called the hospital and requested Eliza's transfer under protective care. The nurse protested protocol. Riley didn't bother arguing. She simply said, "There's a child who survived something most grown men couldn't. Either she walks out of that building alive today, or we lose everything." By 10 a.m., they were on the road. The safe house was a relic, a weather-beaten cabin in the Sierra foothills, once used as a ranger outpost before the state defunded it. No cameras, no cell towers, no curious neighbors, just forest, silence, and a porch that groaned under the weight of 3 lives running out of places to hide. Riley unloaded first. Valor stepped out beside her, nose raised toward the pines. He didn't growl, but his stillness spoke volumes. Eliza emerged next, small frame wrapped in Martin's coat. Her face was pale, but there was more color today, a flicker of recognition when she saw Valor. She reached for his fur without hesitation. Riley watched the way Valor leaned into her. Not out of command, out of memory. Inside, the cabin smelled of old wood and dust. The fireplace still worked. Riley set Martin up in the back room with a cot and the box of salvaged data chips. She gave Eliza the sunroom with the wide windows and a view of the trees. Then she sat down at the scarred kitchen table, opened her laptop, and pulled up every file Martin had given her. Satellite images, logistics rosters, a partial roster of Halcyon staff, most redacted, but a few names survived. Noah Leland, Jonas Clemens, Agnes Yu, all listed as deceased or missing, all linked to Project Halcyon Tier 7. Riley stared at the blinking cursor on her screen. This wasn't just a dog that remembered. This was a child who had been locked away, guarded by a creature engineered to feel and possibly mourn. This was a program that weaponized emotional memory. This was a system that buried its sins in unmarked graves and expected no one to dig. Well, she would dig. She created a new file, titled it Tier 7 Exposure Protocol. Then, line by line, she began. Not as a detective, not even as a survivor, but as someone who owed a child and a dog the truth. That night, while Martin slept and Eliza dozed with her head resting on Valor's flank, Riley stepped out onto the porch. The night air was cold, stars sharp against the ink-black sky. She lit a cigarette. She rarely smoked, but this wasn't about the habit, it was about the weight, about letting it out slowly so it wouldn't crush her from the inside. The wooden boards creaked behind her. Martin. He leaned on the railing beside her, eyes tired but resolute. "She's stronger than we think," he murmured, nodding toward Eliza's window. "Yeah," Riley replied. "But she shouldn't have to be." They stood in silence for a while. Then Martin said, "If you do this, if you go public, it won't just be you they come for." Riley exhaled. "I know." Then why?" She looked out over the trees, hand still resting lightly on her holster. "Because someone always has to be the first to stop running." The storm outside hadn't come with rain, just wind. Long fingers of pine scraped the sides of the cabin as if nature itself wanted in. Inside, the lights were low. The only brightness came from a small, portable projector casting a trembling beam onto the far wall. Riley sat cross-legged on the floor. Martin stood by the old table, hunched over a laptop wired into a series of blinking devices, makeshift technology he'd soldered together from pieces salvaged from Halcyon's ghost network. And Valor? Valor lay still in the center of the room, breathing slow, almost reluctant. Eliza curled beside him, one hand resting on his ribs, as if her touch anchored something inside him. Martin adjusted a dial, a faint chime. The screen blinked to black. Then, light. "All right," he said quietly. "We're inside." It began like a dream. The first image was shaky darkness, a hallway, cement floor. The audio came in as a distant echo, not true sound, but fragments translated from neural waves. A hum, like fluorescent lights. A slow, methodical dripping. Then, movement. A blur of color. And a shape. A girl. Thin, dirt, smudged, crouched in a corner behind steel bars. "Eliza," Riley breathed. The image sharpened for a moment, just long enough to catch the look in the girl's eyes. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was recognition. Toward the viewer, toward Valor. She had known him even then. Another flicker. The scene jumped a lurch in the visual feed, like a heartbeat skipping. The girl stood now, flinching as the door creaked. A figure entered, tall, broad-shouldered, in a white coat and surgical mask. A dark birthmark ran from temple to jaw, twisted like a shadow. Riley stiffened. Martin whispered, "That's him. That's the one from her drawings." The figure raised his voice, muffled and distorted in the playback. Eliza backed away. Then, in a blur, another sound surged, low and guttural. A growl. From Valor. The memory frame jolted forward faster, more erratic. There was barking. A hand raised. Screaming. The man retreated. Door slammed. Static. The image dissolved into white. Martin killed the feed. The room was silent except for the hum of equipment and the harsh sound of Riley's breath. "I don't know how much more his brain can give us," Martin said softly. "These are old memories, scared over." Riley stood slowly. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. "It's enough." She turned to Valor, kneeling in front of him. His eyes were open, watching her, not fearful but distant, as if part of him had stayed in that memory. "You didn't just protect her," Riley said, voice barely above a whisper. "You remembered her, through all of it." Behind her, Eliza stirred. "He was the only one," she murmured. "The only one who didn't leave." Riley turned. "Can you tell me who that man is?" Eliza shook her head. "They never said names, just numbers. I was Subject Fawn. He was Dr. 3. Martin frowned. Dr. 3. That's consistent. Halcyon staff were stripped of names internally. Only high-clearance personnel knew who was who. Riley paced, thoughts tightening into focus. "If we can get one clean image of that man's face, Even with a mask, we can cross-reference facial structure, biometric databases. Somebody somewhere knows who he is, Martin sighed. It won't hold up in court. Neural playback isn't admissible. I'm not looking for a courtroom. I'm looking for truth. And if he's still alive, her eyes narrowed, he'll come back to finish what he started. Later that night, after Martin had shut down the equipment and Eliza had fallen asleep next to Valor again, Riley sat alone on the porch. The wind hadn't died down, but the woods felt still. She opened her phone and scrolled through the images Martin had captured from the playback, each one grainy, haunted, but undeniable. There it was, the masked man's silhouette. She stared at it, jaw clenched. Somewhere in a file, someone had signed off on Tier 7. Somewhere in a government bunker, someone had built dogs not just to obey but to feel, to remember, to protect, no matter what it cost them. And somewhere out there, someone was still trying to bury that truth. She looked back through the window. Valor's head rested beside Eliza's arm. Even in sleep, his body curled protectively around her. Not because he'd been told, because he chose to. The call came just after midnight. Riley had been awake anyway, staring at the ceiling of the safe house with the kind of heavy stillness only silence can breed. Valor slept at her feet. Eliza had finally dozed off on the worn couch, her fingers still clutched around the frayed edge of a blanket. Her phone buzzed once, no ID. She stepped into the kitchen before answering. A voice came through, low and clipped, as if every syllable had to fight its way through static and fear. "Agent Riley?" She didn't respond immediately. "I only have 60 seconds, the voice continued. "You need to listen. Who is this?" "I'm the only person left inside the DOJ who doesn't want you silenced." Riley's hand tensed around the phone. "You're being flagged," the voice said. "Multiple divisions. NSA, Homeland, even Internal Ethics Review, they've issued red notes. Quietly. No arrests, no subpoenas. Just silence." She exhaled. "Let me guess. About Halcyon? About Tier 7. And the dog. They want him gone." Riley closed her eyes. "He's not just a dog. He's a witness." There was a pause on the other end. And then, "That's exactly why." She leaned against the counter, the chipped laminate cold against her palm. "So they're going to kill a police dog to bury a program they claim never existed?" "They're not going to kill him directly. They'll wait. Make it seem like an accident. Mishandled medical implant. Seizure complication. Maybe something toxic slipped into his food at a holding facility. You'll be told it was unfortunate, but you'll never prove it." The words felt like gravel in her chest. "What about Eliza?" she asked, a breath. "They don't know she's alive. Keep it that way." Riley's mind worked fast now, calculating all the places where cameras might have seen them. The hospital, the roads, the safe house itself. Her jaw locked. "What do they think I'm doing?" she asked. "Hunting ghosts," the voice said. "They're not scared of you, Riley, yet. But if you show one more piece of evidence to the press, if one more senator sees a redacted Halcyon memo in their inbox, then you're a problem. And problems get contained." The line crackled. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. A pause. "Because I was there. I signed clearance for Tier 7 testing 5 years ago. I thought it was about enhanced canine response, not psychological bonding, not children. I didn't know, but I should have. And I see the same game being played again. The voice cracked slightly. "You don't owe me trust. Just stay ahead of them." The line cut. Riley stood in the dark kitchen for a long time, the hum of the fridge, the only thing breaking the silence. She looked toward the living room. Valor stirred slightly in his sleep ears, twitching, nose flaring, as if something invisible passed through the air. Eliza curled into herself tighter. They'd both been used. Both created and discarded like experiments with fur and skin, but neither had broken. Not fully. Not yet. And now the system that made them was coming to finish what it started. Riley returned to the table, pulled out the old Halcyon briefcase, and spread its contents under the light maps, memory chips, training logs, fragments of faces and initials and protocol numbers. It had always felt like a puzzle too twisted to finish. But tonight, it became personal. She grabbed her notebook and scribbled a name at the top of a blank page. Tier 7, Witnesses and Weapons. Below that, she wrote, *Valor is the only Tier 7 subject still traceable. DOJ contact confirmed active suppression protocol. Asterisk halcyon implants may contain proof of sentient memory recall. Asterisk. They're not afraid of exposure, they're afraid of precedent. Her pen hovered. Then she underlined the last line twice. If Valor's memories could be decrypted into usable testimony, into evidence admissible in court, or worse, into emotion, then it wouldn't just shatter the halcyon myth. It would open the door to a future where dogs like Valor weren't just trained, they were trusted, where their memories might one day hold weight in cases of abuse, war crimes, or children like Eliza. She looked up, hard steady now. They weren't afraid of the dog. They were afraid of the story. By dawn, she had made a decision. She reached for her encrypted sat phone and called Martin. "We go public," she said. "You sure?" His voice was groggy, but alert. "Once we do that, there's no going back." "I don't want back," she said. "I want truth." Martin exhaled. "All right," he said. "I'll start prepping the data." The room was smaller than Eliza expected. No harsh lights, no mirrored glass. Just soft yellow lamps, a couch that sagged slightly in the middle, and walls painted the kind of blue someone once decided was calming. Riley waited outside. She had asked Eliza if she wanted her inside. Eliza had shaken her head. "I need to try," she had whispered. The child psychiatrist Dr. Hannah Keene was warm in the way people who've seen too much suffering often are. Gentle, but not fake. Her cardigan sleeves were rolled to her elbows, revealing faint scratches from years of being trusted with other people's storms. Eliza sat curled on the edge of the couch. Her fingers toyed with the cuff of her sweater, twisting the threads into knots. Dr. Keene didn't push. She didn't ask for a name or a timeline. Instead, she placed a small recorder on the table between them and said, "We don't have to do anything today, but if you feel ready, I'd like to hear your story in your words." There was a long silence. Then Eliza looked at the far wall, where a sketch, pinned with a magnet, showed a dog and a girl drawn in crayon, uneven but unmistakable. He didn't always hit me," she said at last. "Sometimes he'd just come into the room and stare. Dr. Keene didn't move. He wore a mask. White, like the ones doctors wear in scary movies. But his eyes were red. Not the color, just the way they looked. Angry all the time. Like I ruined something he needed. Her voice didn't shake. That part had gone numb years ago. "There was a dog," Eliza continued. "Not like the others. He didn't bark like they trained them to. He just stood between me and the man. Every time." Dr. Keene leaned forward slightly, careful not to shift the balance too soon. "Do you remember the dog's name?" Eliza looked down. Her hands had stopped fidgeting. "Valor," she said. Behind the glass wall, Riley sat next to Martin in the observation suite. They weren't supposed to be there, but Martin had hardwired the room to stream privately through a closed-circuit feed. They'd encrypted everything, just in case the DOJ was still listening. Valor sat at Riley's side, ears slightly perked, nose pressed to the seam of the door. On the table in front of them, a still image flickered on the screen taken from the decrypted neural mapping data extracted from Valor's chip just 3 nights earlier. A dim room, a child curled on the floor, a white mask just out of frame. And Valor's gaze, locked protective. Now Eliza's words were lining up, like pieces of the same haunted puzzle. Back in the session, Dr. Keene gently asked, what would happen if Valor wasn't there? Eliza's lip trembled. He'd hurt me, or bring in the needle, or lock me in the dark box. The dark box? Eliza nodded. Small, no air holes, just me and the music. At that, Valor stirred on the other side of the door, low whine, tail thumping once. Riley placed a calming hand on his back. Eliza, Dr. Keene said softly, do you remember what the music sounded like? Without answering, Eliza reached into her jacket and pulled out a small object, a music box, the same one found sewn into her clothing when they rescued her. She set it on the table, opened the lid, and let it play. The first few notes rang out clear, mechanical, almost sweet. Then they warped. The final sequence dipped into a minor key, something almost imperceptible to a normal ear, but sharp as a blade to those who had heard it under duress. Eliza's hands curled into fists. I used to count the notes, she said. I had to. They used it. to call the dogs away. But Valor wouldn't leave. Not once. Riley stared at the screen. Her throat tightened. Martin leaned forward. That confirms it. What? He tapped the file. Conditioning QD. Tier 7 override. Audio trigger test. They tried to train Tier 7 dogs to break protection commands if the Q played. Most did. Valor didn't, Riley whispered. He remembered her. Inside the therapy room, Dr. Keene gently turned off the recorder. She didn't speak right away. Eliza, she said finally, you've just given us more than anyone could have imagined. What you remembered, it matches the visual data recorded from Valor's memory chip. Eliza blinked. The dog remembers too? Yes, Dr. Keene said. And now, you validated him. Eliza looked down, whispering so low the recorder almost missed it. Maybe he was the only one who ever did. That night, Riley submitted the session log in Valor's visual memory composite to the independent review panel forming at the state level. It was no longer circumstantial. It was no longer just a dog's bark. It was a testimony, two of them. A child, a canine, both broken, both believed. The rain didn't let up that night. It fell in silver sheets against the hospital windows, drumming a quiet warning into the dark. Somewhere inside, beneath layers of code and silence, Riley had planted a seed, a false memo, routed through encrypted servers and pushed through a forged chain of command. Subject Eliza Mercer scheduled for emergency transport at 0200 hours. Escort detail, 2 agents, sedated. That was all it said, but she knew someone would bite. Doctor. Noah Leland couldn't resist the illusion of control, not when it was slipping from him. And Riley was done waiting. She didn't want evidence anymore. She wanted him. Valor sat beside the loading dock, unmoving, ears angled toward the back alley like they could hear thoughts before they turned into footsteps. He'd been still for almost 10 minutes. Then he growled. Not loud. Just enough to tighten Riley's grip on the flashlight in her jacket pocket. They were alone outside, at least. That's what it looked like. The van idled beside them, back doors open, a stretcher inside. Eliza was not on it. No guards, no agents. Just Riley in plain clothes, and a German shepherd who hadn't stopped watching shadows since they got here. I see him, Riley whispered, even though she didn't. She trusted Valor more than her own eyes now. 2 blocks over, Martin sat hunched in a borrowed surveillance van, headphones on, heartbeat louder than the static in his ears. He monitored the motion sensors Riley had deployed, tiny, scattered across the dock and alley. Still, still, still. Click. One beam blinked out, then another. He's here, Martin said into the comm, but Riley already knew. Valor had risen, stiff and silent, his tail low and eyes narrowed, not in fear, but calculation. Then she heard the footstep. 1, 2, another. A shape moved between the dumpsters. Tall, smooth stride, surgical, Leland. She didn't need a name badge. It was in the way he walked, like the world was a corridor, and every living thing inside it was a lab rat. Drop it, Riley said, stepping into view. Her gun stayed lowered, but her eyes didn't blink. Leland didn't flinch. He stepped into the light, hood drawn back, mask on. For the first time, Riley saw his face. Lines too even, skin too pale. The faint outline of a birthmark half faded down his jaw. Clever, he said. The dog tipped you off, didn't he? Valor growled. Leland's lips twitched. Not quite a smile. He remembers. That's what makes him dangerous. Wrong, Riley replied, steady. That's what makes him human. Leland tilted his head, studying Valor like a failed prototype. He was supposed to forget, he said almost to himself. Tier 7 bonding was meant to be purged after decommission, but this one he kept too much. Saw too much. You mean Eliza? He didn't deny it. She wasn't the only one, Leland said. A gust of wind swept past them, carrying the faint scent of rain, soaked metal, and something else. Motor oil. Riley's eyes narrowed. You came alone? He smiled. Of course not. The warehouse door behind her slammed open. 2 shapes, armed, moving fast. Valor leapt. The first man never saw him coming, was on the ground in seconds. Arm snapped at the elbow. The second raised his weapon too slow. Riley's shot caught him in the leg. He screamed, dropped the rifle, and Valor's teeth were at his throat before he could curse. "Call them off," Leland barked. "They're yours," Riley shot back. "You call them." Martin's voice crackled in her ear. "3 more on thermal, coming from the east wall. You need to move. Now." Riley stepped backward toward the van, Valor beside her, still snarling. Leland raised his hands, but it wasn't surrender. He was smiling again. "You can't keep the data," he said. "Not from them. You don't even know what Tier 8 looks like." That word, Tier 8, it chilled her more than the wind. "Eliza isn't a threat," she said. "She's a survivor. She's a proof of failure." Leland hissed. "They'll never let her speak." Riley's grip tightened. "Then I guess I'll have to get louder." She slammed the van door shut, locking Valor and herself inside. Martin's signal pulsed again. Escape route cleared, alley secure. The tires screeched as she hit the gas. Behind her, Leland vanished into the smoke grenade. His men dropped to cover his exit. Cowardice, wrapped in protocol. They drove 5 blocks before anyone said a word. Then Valor let out a low whine. Riley looked at him. He was panting, a trace of blood on his jaw, not his own. His eyes met hers, steady. "You knew he was coming," she whispered. "You felt him," Valor exhaled. And for the first time that night, Riley's fear turned to something else. Resolve. The trap hadn't caught the snake, but it had exposed the den, and that was enough, for now. The old medical wing had been condemned for years. Paint peeled from the walls like scorched skin, and the air smelled of mildew, antiseptic, and memory. A sign hung crooked over the doorway. Westward Pediatric Ward. Closed until further notice. Inside, the silence was not empty. It waited, coiled. Riley moved through the hallway with a gun in her hand and Valor close behind her heel. Each step echoed too loudly. Boots brushing glass, air thick with dust motes that danced like ghosts in the beam of her flashlight. She hadn't told Martin where she was going. Or Eliza. The girl was hidden in a nearby maintenance tunnel, wrapped in 3 blankets and one silent promise. "I'll come back." Because this had to end. A dim light flickered at the far end of the hall, behind a door marked pharmaceutical storage. She heard him before she saw him. Not footsteps, breathing. Controlled. Measured. Then he stepped into the light. Dr. Noah Leland. The same sterile composure, the same tailored jacket and surgical gloves that no longer belonged in any hospital, only in nightmares. "You brought the dog," he said. No surprise in his voice. Riley raised her weapon. "Drop whatever's in your coat." "Not even a scalpel," he said, hands open, empty. "You've come for answers." "No," she said flatly. "I've come for justice." Valor's growl rumbled like thunder just beneath skin. Leland didn't flinch. His eyes flicked down at the dog, then back up to Riley. "You think this ends with me?" Project Halcyon wasn't one man's work. "No," she agreed, stepping closer. "But you're the one who carved into children. You're the one who programmed dogs to forget who they were. And you're the one who broke Eliza." Leland's eyes finally sparked. Offense? Or amusement? "She wasn't broken," he said slowly. "She was refined. Pain has purpose." Riley fired. Not a killing shot, just to the wall, inches from his head. The plaster exploded. Leland flinched for the first time. Valor stood motionless, waiting. "She's 10, Riley hissed. "And you talk like she was incomplete." He straightened his cuffs. "The world doesn't run on innocence, Agent Riley. It runs on results. And you're going to answer for every one of them." That was when she saw it. A glint just barely visible under the sleeve of his coat. Not a weapon. Not a file. A syringe filled with something clear, viscous, marked only with a single black triangle. Valor moved before Riley could shout. The air tore open with sound, an explosion of growling, snapping jaws, a blur of fur and teeth. Leland staggered back, arm caught in Valor's bite. The syringe clattered to the floor, spinning, before rolling to a stop by Riley's boot. She picked it up. The label read, T7, Purge Inhibitor, Subject Memory Reset. "Ember, you were going to erase her," she whispered. Leland was on the floor, wrist bleeding, still conscious. "You don't understand," he gasped. "She's the last key. If she remembers everything, if the Tier 7 dogs start remembering Halcyon can't be contained, that's the point." "No," he snapped. You think this is about justice? It's not. This is about control. Do you think Valor bonded with that girl by chance? We designed him to protect a target. The project only failed because he refused to let go. That dog is defective. Riley looked down at Valor. The dog stood over Leland, still growling low, but not moving, waiting for Riley. She knelt beside him, touched his back gently. You're not defective, she whispered. You're free. For a long moment, no one spoke. Rain tapped against the broken window panes, rhythmic and cold. Then Valor stepped away. Riley holstered her weapon. Looked down at Leland, broken and trembling now. Where are the rest? She asked. The other Tier 7 dogs? His voice cracked. Some are dead. Some were shut down. Others are still active. Deep cover, black sites, but none of them remember. Riley's eyes narrowed. But Valor does. He shouldn't. That's the thing, he shouldn't. She leaned closer, her voice like a blade. Then maybe memory is stronger than control. Maybe love is... Leland didn't answer. He just stared at Valor, as if trying to find a flaw in something he never understood to begin with. When Riley turned to leave, Valor followed. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The sound of sirens was already approaching. Martin had traced her after all. They would take Leland. But the real war wasn't over. Because now, they knew what Halcyon was afraid of. Not exposure. Remembrance. Blue-white strobes splintered the dark as police cruisers funneled into the cracked parking lot of the condemned pediatric wing. Sirens cut off one by one, leaving only the hiss of rain and the hum of engines idling in nervous rhythm. Riley stood at the building's entrance, gun lowered but ready. Valor pressed against her left thigh like a living shield. The dog's muzzle was still stained with Dr. Noah Leland's blood. His chest rose and fell in slow, deliberate intervals, the calm after a storm that hadn't truly passed. Inside, 2 SWAT officers dragged Leland down the corridor. Zip cuffs bit into his wrists. Crimson seeped through the torn fabric at his forearm where Valor's teeth had found purchase. His eyes, those unsettling surgeon's eyes, flicked from fluorescent ruin to ruin, as if cataloging his own downfall for later dissection. Martin hurried in behind the tactical team, rain jacket flapping, laptop bag slung across one shoulder. He found Riley with a look that mixed triumph and terror. "County DA's en route," he said, voice shaking from adrenaline. "They want your statement on tape within the hour." Riley's gaze never left Leland. As long as he's cuffed and breathing, they can have whatever they want. SWAT halted at the threshold. Outside, floodlights painted everything in surgical theater white. Cameras, local news, maybe national clustered behind barricades. Their lenses already hungry. Leland saw the lights and let out a small, mirthless laugh. "You really think any of them will understand?" he asked, voice hoarse but arrogant. Riley stepped forward. "Understand what? That you tortured children to train guard dogs? That you called it progress?" A flash of contempt crossed his face. "Progress is never painless, Agent Boone. You'll learn that." 2 FBI transport agents moved in with a reinforced steel carrier van, the kind reserved for high-risk detainees. Leland's smile faltered at the sight that Cage was too small even for his delusions. The lead agent read the Miranda rights. Rain ticked on the clipboard like a metronome of inevitability. Leland answered nothing, offered no resistance. His gaze found Riley again clinical, probing like she had just become the most fascinating experiment of his life. As agents guided him toward the van, he stumbled deliberate, a final bid for proximity. The escorts tightened their grip, but Leland leaned in, lips inches from Riley's ear. Valor growled, low and electric. "Tier 8 has already begun," Leland whispered, breath metallic with blood. "You're too late." Then he straightened, mask of calm sliding back over his features, and allowed himself to be steered into the waiting vehicle. The doors slammed shut with a hydraulic hiss. For a heartbeat, everything was silent but rain. The word Tier 8 ricocheted in Riley's skull like a round without a chamber. She felt Martin step beside her, sensed Valor press closer, but her eyes stayed fixed on the van's taillights as it pulled away into the maze of police cruisers. "Tier 8? Martin echoed, voice barely audible over the weather. "I thought they ended at 7. "Apparently not," Riley said. Her throat felt scorched. "Which means Halcyon's still alive somewhere. and we just rattled the first branch of its tree. Camera flashes erupted as reporters realized the suspect was in custody. Questions fired across the barricade. Detective, is it true the dog made the positive ID? Does this arrest confirm a secret government program? Is Project Halcyon linked to missing child cases nationwide? Riley ignored them. Valor's ears flattened against the racket. She knelt, placing a steady hand on his shoulders. Even through Kevlar and fur, she felt the tremor, not fear, but readiness. An instinct that said the hunt was bigger than one mad doctor. Behind her, an ambulance door opened with a squeal. Eliza, still swaddled in blankets, peered out under a paramedic's watchful eye. The girl's gaze found Riley, then Valor, then the empty street where Leland's van had vanished. For the first time since the rescue, the child allowed herself a tiny nod as if to say, "One monster down." Riley returned it with a promise in her eyes. Not the last. Inside her cruiser 10 minutes later, rainwater pooling on the floor mat, Riley replayed Leland's words on a loop. Tier 8 has already begun. She tapped the steering wheel, thinking of every redacted line in the Halcyon files, every deceased staffer whose body was never found, every unexplained animal control pickup of German shepherds with immaculate training scars. Valor rested his head on her lap, amber eyes reflecting the dash lights. He didn't twitch at Thunder anymore. Instead, he watched her, waiting for the next command, though they both knew the initiative had passed beyond simple commands now. Riley reached into her coat and retrieved the syringe she'd taken from Leland, the one labeled T7 Purge Inhibitor. She rolled it between her fingers. A single dose could have wiped a child from Valor's memory forever. What then could Tier 8 do? She pocketed the vial, started the engine, and spoke without looking away from the stormy windshield. "Martin," she said into the radio, "pull every aerospace manifest you can for the last 18 months. Black site supply chains, veterinary pharmaceuticals, anything flagged confidential medical research. We're hunting ghosts in centrifuges now." "Roger," his static-laced voice replied. "And when the press conference starts, let them ask their questions," Riley said, shifting into drive. "Tonight they get a name. Tomorrow, the story. After that," she glanced at Valor, who thumped his tail once against the seat, "we give them the proof." She pulled into the convoy, leading back to the safe house, red-blue lights cutting the night. As they rolled past the barricade, reporters shouted for comment. Riley cracked the window just enough for her voice to carry. "Project Halcyon is real," she said into the rain-soaked microphones. "And this is only the first arrest." Then she closed the window. Valor exhaled, curling up against her gear bag. Rain drummed harder, like applause, as they disappeared into the dark toward Tier 8, whatever it was, and whoever thought memory could be silenced. The sixth-floor conference room of the Federal Annex stank of stale coffee and evasion. Fluorescent lights hummed over Deputy Director Calder as he addressed the room. "The Halcyon incident is classified. Dr. Leland acted alone. There was no sanctioned program." Detective Riley stood at the far end, still in field clothes, arms folded. Her German shepherd, Valor, lay at her feet, eyes tracking every face, every lie. Calder's sanitized presentation skimmed past the truth. No mention of children locked away, of memory, wiping syringes, or of the dog who had remembered it all. "Officially," Calder said, "Halcyon was defunded years ago. We emphasize that." Riley's voice was flat. "So it never existed?" "Not in any way you can prove." Calder slid a folder toward her. "Sign the non-disclosure, or you'll be charged with espionage." Martin, their analyst, clutched his laptop like a life vest. "Sir, we have neural recordings, patient logs." "Classified," Calder snapped. But what Calder didn't know, Martin had already sent everything to Dana Voss at the Herald. 40 minutes later, Valor padded beside Riley down the courthouse, steps into a cold drizzle. Martin caught up, pale and shaking. "It's out," he said. "All of it. Neural feed, confession, the Tier 7 funding ledger." Riley nodded. "Good. Now we see who they really are." Within hours, headlines exploded. "Doe hides child, trauma K9 program." The still image. Eliza behind bars, her hand resting on Valor's muzzle, a masked man looming. By noon, number Halcyon Truth trended worldwide. Congressional staff scrambled. Cable networks replayed grainy footage of the girl's plea, of Valor's growl. The public narrative Calder tried to bury ignited like wildfire. By afternoon, Riley's inbox chimed, a request to testify before Congress. She sat on the floor of Martin's safe apartment, Valor's head in her lap. Eliza, rescued, recovering, dozed nearby. "They want everything," Martin said. "They'll get it," Riley whispered, stroking Valor's ear. "He remembered, so they wouldn't forget." Eliza stirred, crossed the room silently, and handed Riley a new drawing. It showed a dog standing guard before cages of children while suited men slunk away into darkness. Riley's throat tightened. "They're not running this anymore, kid." Eliza leaned on Valor. "He remembers, so we don't forget." Days later, in a makeshift clinic built inside a barn, Valor lay on a salvaged surgical table, chest rising with labored breaths. Dr. Hughes, called out of retirement, examined the implant degrading in Valor's skull. "It's failing," she said softly. "If we remove it, he may die instantly. But if we don't—" "How long?" Riley asked. "Less than a week." Eliza approached without fear and pressed her palm to Valor's neck. "He's staying," she whispered. That night, they turned the back room of the safe house into a sanctuary. Eliza curled up next to Valor under soft quilts. No machines, no wires, just warmth. Riley watched their chests rise and fall together. Each breath from Valor a whisper of resistance, of memory. "He's holding on for her," Riley murmured. Martin asked, "And when she has to let go?" Riley answered, "She'll remember, just like he did." At 3 a.m., Valor stirred, whined in confusion. Eliza soothed him. Riley joined them, hand on his side. "He's scared," Eliza whispered. "Maybe," Riley said. "But he's also brave." "Like me?" "Exactly like you." Valor laid his head on Riley's knee, locking eyes with Eliza one last time. The storm outside faded to silence. Inside, 3 heartbeats spoke without words. Morning brought candlelight, soft breaths, and the bitter truth. No more medicine could stop what was coming. Hughes handed Riley a flash drive. "His records. Use them when the time's right." Eliza braided a ribbon from quilt threads blue and white and tied it to Valor's collar. "What's that?" Martin asked. "A promise," Eliza replied. "So he knows where to find me in his dreams." That evening, news stations broadcast Valor's memory files nationwide. Experts debated if dogs could testify. Veterans called him a hero. None of it reached Valor's room. In that quiet space, Valor's breaths slowed. Riley kept her fingers on his fur, guarding time like it was sacred. "We'll keep the story safe," she whispered. His tail thumped once, then he exhaled and did not inhale again. Riley bowed her head. Eliza buried her face in Valor's neck and cried soft, endless sobs that no one dared hush. Hughes checked for a heartbeat, then nodded. "He's gone," and he went gently. 2 days later, while Congress debated oversight and ethics, Riley, Martin, and Hughes built a small memorial at the sanctuary. In a glass box, Valor's collar, his badge, the ribbon, and Eliza's drawing of him tail-wagging under a sunrise. Below, one word in block letters. Hero Eliza placed a scrap of quilt fabric inside, then stepped back. "He'll see it?" Riley smiled through tears. "He already does." The box was displayed under a sign, Valor's watch. Future rescue dogs would pass beneath it, learning that memory wasn't punishment, it was purpose. As dusk fell and wind moved through the pines, Riley stood beside Eliza on the porch. "He's still brave," the girl said. "So are you." They watched the last light slip behind the ridge. In that quiet space between sorrow and sunrise, they knew Valor's story wouldn't end in a file or fade with a storm. He had remembered for them all. And now, the world would remember him. The land stretched just far enough to feel like promised 10 rolling acres of meadow grass bordered by long-needled pines and a creek that stitched silver through the back pasture. The county assessor's paperwork called it Parcel 14B, but Riley Boone tasted the name even before the ink on the deed dried. It began with a single wooden gate. Martin hammered the last hinge into place, sweat darkening the collar of an old field jacket that still smelled faintly of smoke from the scrapyard fire. When the gate swung true, no squeak, no sag, he stepped back, wiping sawdust from his hands. "Look straight," he said. Riley nodded. "Straight's good." She reached into her truck bed and lifted a fresh cedar sign. Letters carved by a local artisan who refused payment after he heard the story. In bold, beveled script it read, "Valor's Watch, Sanctuary for Retired and Rescued Service Dogs." Beneath the title, a smaller line burned into the wood, "They remember, so we remember." Together they mounted it to the gatepost. The scent of cedar leaked into the spring, air clean, resolute. The sanctuary's main barn was a former equestrian stable painted weather red, now gutted and refurbished with insulated kennels, radiant floor heat, and a quiet examination room outfitted by Dr. Hughes. She called it her healing porch, insisting windows stay open unless the air turned cruel. She said dogs trusted sunbeams more than syringes. Inside, Riley unrolled thick rubber mats in the central aisle, while Martin set up feed bins labeled by hand. Buddy retired bomb unit PTSD. M. Lucy narcotics knoin. Gunshot recovery. Finn search and rescue washout. Anxiety. Every name carried a file, a past, someone wished to shelve but couldn't scrub away. Here, those records were invitations, not indictments. At noon, a rattling van bounced up the gravel drive. The first arrivals, Riley's heart kicked like it hadn't since the raid in Greystone. She met the driver, a soft-spoken volunteer from a downstate shelter, and helped lower a brindle shepherd mix onto a padded gurney. One eye milky hind leg braced in metal. The tag on his crate read, Argo. He whimpered at the unfamiliar air, until Riley pressed her palm to his cheek and whispered, "Safe post, you can stand down." Words Valor once understood. Argo's shoulders eased, and the first gate click of the new life sounded like a lock giving way. Days found rhythm quickly. Dawn patrol with coffee, steam, and dew-wet boots. Martin logged medical charts in the converted tack room. Riley practiced scent games with the shy ones, coaxing them out of corners with lavender-stuffed pouches. Eliza now splitting her weeks between therapy sessions and the sanctuary crafted nameplates using watercolor leaves and paw print stamps. The creek became the dog's favorite classroom. Riley stood on its pebbled bank each afternoon, tossing floating toys downstream, watching Buddy, a chocolate lab with ribs like bowed reeds, realize water could mean play, not floodlight searches. Watching Lucy forget, for one bright second, the echo of cracking rifles. At night, Riley often walked the perimeter alone, lantern in hand, listening to crickets and the distant bark reply from kennels settling into sleep. She could almost feel Valor pacing the fence line beside her ghost weight against her thigh, checking for gaps, for dangers. She touched the ribbon Eliza had tied to her keyring. Promise kept. Word of the sanctuary spread faster than Riley predicted. A local news station aired a segment. Then a national podcast host requested an interview. Donations trickled blankets, chew toys, checks with shaky memoirs scribbled on the memo line. For the partner that pulled me from rubble. A retired Marine showed up, unannounced, left a bundle of homemade biscuits on the porch, saluted the air, and drove away in tears. With each story came more dogs. Some arrived stoic, some trembling, one silent Malinois biting back phantom screams. Dr. Hughes stitched, dosed, whispered. Martin built a second kennel row, cursing bent nails but smiling anyway. Riley filled notebook after notebook with progress logs. Argo accepted harness. Lucy played 15 minutes. Finn rested without pacing. Eliza painted a mural across the barn's west wall. It started with Valor front and center, ribbon bright blue. Around him she added Buddy, Lucy, Finn, Argo. Space remained for those still to come. Above them waves of color arced like northern lights, and Eliza wrote in careful cursive, "Memory is a path home." Riley watched her outline each letter, tears blurring pride and ache. "Looks like hope," she said. Eliza dabbed a brush in gold. "Looks like family." Late April brought a meteor shower. Martin dragged camp chairs to the paddock. Hughes brewed cocoa. Dogs padded through grass, noses tilted to new scents, smoke, night-blooming phlox, distant salt of stars falling. Riley sat cross-legged under the sky, Argo's head in her lap, Buddy snoring at her feet. As streaks of silver stitched the dark, Riley whispered stories of Valor, his first growl in the Greystone basement, the ribbon, his final breath timed to Eliza's heartbeat. The dogs seemed to listen, ears flicking, tails thumping in low rhythm like drums from another memory. Martin cleared his throat, reading from a scribbled mission statement he'd drafted. Here, every dog retires a hero, no matter how the world once named them. Hughes raised her mug. Eliza smiled through stardust. Riley looked at the constellation-carved sky and felt, for the first time since Valor's last exhale, something loosened its grip. Not release, she would never want that, but ease, like a bandage laid right. At sunrise the next day, Riley opened the main barn doors. A rush of golden light spilled over Kennel Row, and 40 eyes blinked into the warmth. Some barked, others simply sighed. She counted heads, habit, comfort, all present, all accounted. She stepped outside, coffee in hand, leaned against the gatepost beneath the cedar sign. The wind lifted, carrying pine and river and healing fir. Somewhere far off a freight train blew its horn, but here the stillness held. Valor's watch was no longer a dream etched in grief. It was wood and wire, mud and laughter, scars and second chances. It was the echo of a single dog's choice to remember grown into a refuge where memory could be carried without shame or fear. Riley closed her eyes and breathed deep. Behind her, paws pattered across the yard morning patrol, volunteers heading out, tails wagging slow. She pictured Valor trotting at their lead, ears high, gaze soft but vigilant. "Keep watch, partner," she murmured. And in the hush before chores began, she almost felt that tail brush her calf one more time. The bell rang at Pine Hollow Elementary with a clatter of lockers and eager chatter, but Eliza Mercer didn't flinch. She stood by the front office, backpack hugged to her ribs, one hand resting on the warm fur of a golden tawny shepherd mix sitting politely at her side. His name was Quest, the first therapy dog trained start to finish at Valor's watch. 8 months earlier, he'd arrived skeletal and skittish, retired prematurely from a failed drug detection program. Now, with a lavender bandana knotted at his neck and a therapy dog asked to pet badge clipped to the collar, he embodied something Riley liked to call earned gentleness. "Ready?" the guidance counselor asked, stepping from the hall. Eliza nodded. Quest rose at her cue, and together they padded toward the auditorium doors, paw and sneaker finding rhythm, like twin heartbeats. Healing hadn't followed a straight line. There were nights Eliza still woke gasping, hearing phantom music box notes between thunderclaps. There were mornings she'd freeze at the click of a locker or a teacher's sudden cough. But each episode ended the same way, Quest pressing his head to her ribs, grounding her with the slow, certain drum of canine breathing. Riley had arranged twice weekly visits. Eliza to the sanctuary for equine brushing, scent trail games, and the quiet chores no one else volunteered for refilling water buckets at dawn, tearing strips of old towels for tug toys. Dr. Hughes called it purpose therapy. Martin called it homework you can feel. Eliza called it visiting Valor, because every path on that land hummed with his memory. In counseling sessions, she practiced speaking to an empty chair, then to Quest, then to Riley. Each time the words grew steadier. How a dog once stood between her and nightmare hands. How remembering had saved them both. The final assignment came from her language arts teacher: write a hero tale and present it at the spring assembly. The class murmured complaints. Eliza raised her hand, surprising even herself. "I already have one." The auditorium smelled of sawdust and poster paint, the stage dressed with paper stars reading Everyday Heroes 6th Grade Showcase. Parents filled folding chairs, teachers lined back walls. Quest trotted up the ramp beside Eliza, tail wagging in a slow pendulum of permission. A murmur rippled through 5th graders. Some reached to pet but stopped at the badge. Quest merely blinked, golden eyes calm. Eliza's cue came after a boy recited a poem about firefighters. She took her place at the podium, cheeks pink, shoulders squared, and slipped a handcrafted booklet from her backpack. The cover showed a charcoal drawing of Valor, ribbon visible, words penciled beneath. "Memory Guard" by Eliza Mercer. She adjusted the microphone. It squeaked. A flicker of tension tightened her throat, but Quest nudged her knee. She breathed in lavender, let it out. "My hero," she began, voice clear, "is a dog who never forgot me, even when the world told him to forget." Silence settled. Children, parents, teachers, leaning forward. "He was born to obey," she said. "Scientists tried to turn him into a tool, Tier 7 they called it, but he chose to remember instead. He remembered a scared little girl in a dark room. He remembered how to stand between her and fear. She turned a page, Valor's face sketched beside a small, trembling version of herself. He was brave, she continued. Not because he fought monsters, but because he loved louder than they could silence. Her voice wavered, then steadied. His name was Valor, and when he died, he asked me to keep watch for others who might be lost. She closed the booklet. Quest nudged again, as if urging the last line. So I will, she said. We all can by believing that memories matter, even when they hurt, because love built from memory can save more than one life. Applause rose first, tentative, then thunderous. Eliza blinked and realized her hands weren't shaking. She looked down. Quest's tail thumped approval against the stage. Students clustered around as she stepped off stage. One girl with pigtails whispered, "Your dog's cool." A boy handed Eliza a folded note. "My uncle has nightmares from the army. Maybe Quest could help him?" Eliza pocketed it, heart swelling. Quest soaked up pats, lowering his head so even the smallest kindergartner could reach. When the crowd thinned, Riley approached from the wings, eyes bright. Valor's ribbon now tied to her key lanyard. "You nailed it," she said, kneeling to Eliza's height. Eliza smiled. "I almost forgot the last line. Quest reminded me." Riley scratched Quest's ruff. "That's what partners do," Martin joined, waving his phone. "Social feed's blowing up someone. Live streamed your speech." He grinned. "The world's getting its shoulders straightened by a 6th grader." Eliza blushed. "I just told the truth." "Truth's heavy," Riley said. "You carried it well." Back at the sanctuary, Golden Hour spilled honey across paddocks. Eliza walked the fence line with Quest trotting sentinel. They stopped at Valor's memorial wall, the shadow box glowing amber in late sun. Eliza traced the glass over the hand-drawn hero, then unclipped Quest's badge and slipped it into her pocket. "For tomorrow," she told him. Quest licked her hand gently. In the barn, Buddy barked for dinner. Lucy tossed a jolly ball. New arrivals watched shyly from corners, waiting to see if this place meant hurt or healing. Eliza knelt, calling softly, "It's safe here, promise." Quest sat beside her, living proof. A brindled puppy limped forward, sniffing hope. From the porch, Riley watched hands in pockets, eyes misting. Martin handed her a mug of chamomile. "She's building the next chapter," he said. "Yeah," Riley answered, voice thick. "And every page is lighter, Doctor." Hughes joined, wiping flour from her apron she'd baked victory biscuits. "Eliza asked if we could do reading circles for the dogs. Said stories teach trust." Riley smiled, heart aching in the best way. "Make it Sunday tradition." They stood in companionable silence as dusk deepened, listening to laughter echo between stalls, to the creek whispering on its silver path. Overhead, bats flitted a reminder that even night has its guardians. Eliza walked toward the porch, Quest at heel and the brindle pup toddling after. "This one needs a name," she called. Riley considered as the puppy leaned against Eliza's leg, eyes closing in relief. "How about Beacon?" Eliza beamed. "Beacon it is." Quest barked softly approval, perhaps applause. And beneath the twilight sky of Valor's watch, another circle of memory began. Fear transmuted to trust, hurt to healing, a child's voice steady where silence once lived. Somewhere beyond the pines, the world still roiled with hearings and headlines. But here, in the sanctuary built from one dog's refusal to forget, the future stretched open wide enough for every broken heart to run, rest, and remember. A cold front slid down from the mountains overnight, and by dawn Valor's watch stood beneath a sky scraped clean, stars still visible even as pale daylight elbowed in. Riley Boone woke before the rooster habit hardwired pulled on a flannel and boots, and padded into the kitchen for coffee. Padded mailer lay against the doorframe. No postmark, no return address, just her name, block printed in black Sharpie, R. Boone. Riley's pulse nudged higher. She set the mug down, knelt, and pinched the seal. The adhesive gave way in one slow rip that sounded too loud in the sleeping house. Inside, no letter, no drive, no threat. Only a single 5x7 photograph, glossy, edges crisp. And on its back a sticker typed in small caps, "Dir, Ot, Subject Echo. Riley flipped the photo under the stovelight. A German shepherd sat in a concrete kennel floor slotted for drainage, stainless bars gleaming. The dog's build was leaner than Valor's, coat darker at the saddle. But the eyes, amber, flecked with gold, sharp yet kind. Eyes that had once watched a girl in a basement and chosen love over programming. Riley's breath caught. She felt the room sway a memory, hitting like a body blow. Valor's heartbeat against her palm. The final exhale. She turned the photo over again. Nothing else. No coordinates. No demands. Just proof of something unfinished. Martin found her at the table, photo face down, untouched coffee cooling. "Bad news?" he asked, setting a box of screws on the counter he'd planned to spend the morning mending kennel latches. "Depends," Riley said. He lifted the picture. "Another shepherd?" "Tier 8, she answered. Martin read the label. "Echo. God." He pulled out a chair. "Think someone wants help, or wants to taunt us?" "Could be both," Riley said. "But whoever sent it bypassed our P.O. box in the farm store drop. They knew my actual door." Across the house, morning sounds stirred Buddy's labored yawn, Lucy's collar jingling, Eliza's sleepy voice coaxing Beacon off his blanket. Ordinary life pushing in against this new shadow. Riley stared at the photo. "Look at his eyes." Martin did. Valor's eyes. "Maybe Tier 8 means they refined the method," she said. "Stronger conditioning, deeper memory. Or maybe they're trying again from scratch," Martin finished, brow knitting. "New dogs, new children." Riley folded her hand around the picture, thumb brushing the shepherd's muzzle through plastic sheen. "Not if we can find him first." By noon, the sanctuary bustled. Volunteer teams, scrubbing water buckets. Doctor Hughes vaccinating a pair of newly arrived spaniels. Eliza reading Charlotte's Web aloud to Quest and Beacon in the shade of the equipment shed. The crisp air smelled of pine sap and oatmeal biscuits cooling on the porch rail. Riley stepped into her small office, once attack room, now stacked with case folders. Sanctuary permits, congressional subpoena copies, and dialed Judge Elaine Greer, chair of the Special Halcyon Inquiry. Greer answered on the second ring. "Agent Boone, I hear the dogs are thriving." "They're healing, Judge. That's different." Greer's tone softened. "What's happened?" Riley explained the envelope. "Echo. Tier 8. Silence crackled on the line. Finally, Greer said, "I don't have jurisdiction beyond Tier 7 documents, but Langley is already spooked by public outrage. They might cooperate if you push diplomatically." "Diplomacy won't find a cage in time," Riley replied. A sigh. "Then I suggest you leverage the court of public opinion again while you still have its ear." "Copy that." Riley hung up. The judge couldn't greenlight a search, but she'd tacitly blessed an offensive. Evening draped violet over pine ridges when Riley, Martin, Dr. Hughes, and Eliza gathered on the porch. Quest dozed at Eliza's feet. Lucy chased fireflies across the yard. Riley laid the photo on the table. Lantern light haloed Echo's face. "Eliza," Riley said gently, "does this place look familiar?" The girl studied the kennel, the groove of the drain, the angle of the barred door. She shook her head. "Not like the basement. Too clean." She traced a finger along the edge. "But the shadows feel the same." Martin set a laptop down. "I ran metadata. Nothing. Stripped clean. But ambient echoes in the JPEG tiny audio artifacts pick up a faint hum at 60 Hz. That's consistent with industrial refrigeration units." Warehouse?" Hughes guessed. "Or a biotech cold storage facility," Martin said. Riley scanned the property map pinned to the railing circles over decommissioned labs, vet pharma distributors, military canine depots. "Too many leads," she muttered. "We need a noise big enough to shake whoever sent this." Eliza looked up. "A story?" Riley met her gaze. The last leak had toppled giants. A new one might flush ghosts from hiding, but risked tipping Echo's captors. Hughes spoke softly. "Sometimes light saves faster than shadows hunt." Riley exhaled. "Then we shine." The next morning, Riley filmed a 2-minute video in front of Valor's mural. She held up Echo's photo, spoke of unfinished accountability, of dogs still trapped in projects no longer acknowledged. She ended with a pledge. "If you know where Subject Echo is, contact the Special Inquiry Hotline. No child, no animal should pay for secrets again. M." Martin posted the video across social platforms tied to the original Halcyon leak. Within an hour, Find Echo trended. Pilots offered private flights. Hackers dissected supply chain invoices. A former janitor from a DHS training base DM'd coordinates of a newly welded kennel block. Riley's phone buzzed nonstop. Tips, half-truths, threats. But one message pinned her breath. Saw him. Red River Biotech. Unit 12B. Tulsa outskirts. Night shift guard. Eyes like fire. No name. But attached was a grainy security cam still. Echo pacing a chain-link run. Riley met Martin's gaze across the office. "Pack the truck!" He nodded, no question this time. Eliza appeared in the doorway, Quest at heel, Beacon trotting behind. She held Valor's ribbon out to Riley. "For Echo," she said. "So he knows where home is." Riley tied the ribbon to her wrist. The fabric, once blue, had faded to dusty indigo, but its strength held. Memory, woven into threads. She knelt, hugging Eliza. "Keep watch here." "I will," the girl promised, voice firm. Riley rose, checked her service sidearm, and stepped into the crisp, Oklahoma-bound evening. The photo of Echo in her chest pocket, eyes bright, pleading through glossy silence. Overhead, the sanctuary's porch light flickered on automatic timer. Same hour every night since Valor died. A beacon Riley refused to reset. A reminder that even when darkness circled, someone still kept the light. She glanced back at the glowing bulb, at Eliza framed in golden spill. Quest's ears pricked. "Valor," Riley whispered to the sky. "Stay with this one, too." Then she climbed into the truck, engine rumbling awake. Gravel crunched. Pine shadows folded behind her. Ahead lay highways, fences, gates, maybe guns, but also one shepherd in need of remembering, and a promise that memory, once freed, would never be caged again. Every bark, nudge, and wag in Valor's story reminds us why dogs, especially steadfast German shepherds, hold such a tender corner of the human heart. Their devotion asks for nothing, yet offers everything. Comfort on sleepless nights, courage when our own feels thin, a living bridge between past hurt and new hope. When we honor that bond, we discover love is not a grand gesture, but the quiet decision to keep showing up for one another, paw in hand. If hearing Valor's journey stirred something in you, you might enjoy chatting with your local Humane Society trainer about simple bond-building games. It's not a program or product, just a friendly resource many folks overlook. Yet it can deepen the conversation you already share with your own dog. No pressure, of course. Keep doing what feels right for you and your four-legged friend. Just promise yourself one extra walk, one extra scratch behind the ears tonight. Little moments become lifetimes in a dog's memory and ours.